Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote woodlands of the Superior National Forest in northern Minnesota, just outside a tiny, unincorporated settlement called Echo Valley. I've always been drawn to solitude, the kind that wraps around you like a blanket, quieting the noise of everyday life. My therapist called it pathological introversion, but I prefer to think of it as self-sufficiency. After my sister Abigail's disappearance 3 years ago, the need for isolation only intensified. The pitying glances, the awkward conversations that died when I entered a room, it all became unbearable. So when my vacation time came up at the accounting firm where I worked, I didn't hesitate. I packed my hiking gear, loaded up my German Shepherd, Luna, and headed north to Minnesota's wilderness. The plan was simple. 7 days of hiking and camping in Superior National Forest, far from cell reception, email notifications, and the sympathetic head tilts that made my skin crawl. Just me, Luna, and the woods. If only I'd known what waited for us there. The drive from Minneapolis took nearly 4 hours. As I ventured farther north, the towns grew smaller, the gaps between them wider. Civilization thinned out like watered-down paint. By the time I reached the ranger station at the forest's edge, the afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows through the pines. Planning to stay long? The ranger was a leathery man in his 60s with permanently sun-squinted eyes. His nameplate read, Frank. "About a week," I replied, filling out the backcountry permit. "Just me and my dog." Frank's weathered face creased with concern. "Solo female hiker, huh? You've done this before?" The question irritated me, though I'd expected it. "Yes, many times." "Not here you haven't," he said, tapping my driver's license. "I know most everyone who comes through regularly." "First time in Superior, but I've hiked all over the Rockies and Appalachian Trail." He grunted, seemingly satisfied but not pleased. "Well, stick to the marked trails. There's been some strange business lately." My pen paused over the form. "Strange how?" "Hikers reporting. Disorientation. Getting turned around even on clearly marked paths." He shrugged. "Probably nothing. Summer heat playing tricks." It was early October, well past summer heat, but I didn't point this out. "Oh, and avoid Echo Valley if you can." He handed back my license. "Locals there don't much care for outsiders." I nodded, though I had no intention of seeking out human interaction. "Any wildlife concerns?" "Bears are always a possibility, though they're more scared of you. Wolves keep their distance. The real danger is the weather this time of year. It can turn nasty fast." He studied my form. "You heading to Timber Ghost Lake?" "That's the plan. I heard the views are spectacular." Something flickered across his face. "They are. Just stick to the eastern shore, will you? Western side gets treacherous." I thanked him for the advice and headed back to my car. Luna wagged her tail eagerly from the back seat as I approached. At 5 years old, she was in her prime, strong, alert, and fiercely protective. If there was anything to worry about in these woods, she'd sense it long before I did. "Ready for an adventure, girl?" I scratched behind her ears and she licked my wrist in response. I drove another 40 minutes down increasingly rough forest roads until I reached the trailhead parking area. Only 2 other vehicles sat in the graveled lot, a mud-splattered pickup truck and an older model Subaru with Colorado plates. Perfect. Minimal human contact was just what I wanted. By the time Luna and I hit the trail, golden hour was in full effect. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. The October air carried that distinctive crispness, hinting at the winter to come but still comfortable enough for hiking. The scent of pine and decay filled my lungs. a heady, earthy perfume that instantly soothed something in my soul. According to my map, Timber Ghost Lake was about 8 miles in. With daylight fading, I'd need to set up a midway camp and finish the journey tomorrow. Luna trotted ahead, occasionally circling back as if to check that I was still following. Her presence was reassuring, a furry guardian keeping watch. About 3 miles in, we came to a fork in the trail not marked on my map. The left path continued along the ridgeline, while the right descended into a thicker section of forest. I pulled out my compass, confirming that the left path maintained our northeasterly direction toward the lake. Strange that the map didn't show this divergence. As I studied the compass, Luna growled, a low, throaty sound I rarely heard from her. "What is it, girl?" I scanned our surroundings, seeing nothing unusual. Just trees, underbrush, and the gradually dimming forest. Luna's attention was fixed on the right path. Her hackles raised. "It's okay," I soothed, though uneasiness prickled at the back of my neck. "We're going this way." I pointed to the left trail, and Luna reluctantly followed, still glancing back at the other path. We hiked for another hour before I found a suitable camping spot near a small stream. The clearing was just large enough for my 2-person tent, with a convenient flat rock that would serve as a cooking surface. As the last light faded from the sky, I set up camp with practiced efficiency. Tent secured, sleeping bag unrolled, bare canister with food stored a proper distance away. I boiled water on my portable stove for a freeze-dried meal while Luna patrolled the perimeter of our campsite, occasionally stopping to sniff intently at something beyond the ring of light cast by my headlamp. "You're being weird tonight," I told her, stirring my reconstituted beef stroganoff. "Is it the new territory?" Her only response was to stare into the darkness, ears perked forward. After dinner, I secured everything that might attract wildlife and crawled into the tent with Luna. Despite the day's physical exertion, sleep eluded me. The forest nights were never truly silent, always a symphony of rustling leaves, chittering insects, and distant animal calls. But something about these sounds felt off. Not necessarily louder or more threatening, just wrong somehow, as if the typical forest soundtrack had been subtly remixed by someone who'd only read about forests but never actually heard one. Luna sensed it too. She lay pressed against me, more vigilant than relaxed, her eyes fixed on the tent wall facing the direction we'd come from. "There's nothing out there," I whispered, as much to convince myself as her. Around midnight, I slipped into a fitful doze, only to jerk awake sometime later. Luna was standing over me, a low rumble in her throat. Outside, something moved past our tent, something large enough to make the ground vibrate slightly with each step. "Bear," I thought, my heart hammering. "Just stay still. It will move on." The footsteps circled our tent once, twice, 3 times. Luna's growl intensified, and I clutched her collar, afraid she might bark or, worse, try to charge out of the tent. The last thing I needed was a confrontation with a curious black bear. Then the footsteps stopped, directly in front of the tent flap. I held my breath, one hand still gripping Luna's collar, the other fumbling silently for the bear spray in my pack. A voice, distinctly human but unsettlingly hollow, spoke from just outside the thin fabric barrier. "You shouldn't be here, Abigail." My blood turned to ice. Abigail, my sister's name. The sister who'd vanished 3 years ago during a solo weekend trip to a cabin in Wisconsin. Before I could process this, Luna exploded into frenzied barking, lunging so forcefully against my grip that I nearly lost hold of her collar. The presence outside moved away rapidly, too rapidly for something so heavy, crashing through the underbrush. "Luna, stop," I commanded, but she continued barking, her body rigid with aggression. It took several minutes to calm her, during which I strained to hear any sound of the intruder returning. Nothing. Just the usual forest ambience, now seeming even more wrong than before. Sleep was out of the question after that. I sat up with Luna for the remainder of the night, knife in one hand, bear spray in the other. jumping at every snapping twig or gust of wind. By the time dawn's gray light seeped through the tent walls, my eyes burned with exhaustion, and my mind raced with questions. Who was out there? How did they know Abigail's name? Was it just a cruel prank, or something more sinister? One thing was certain. I needed to reach Timber Ghost Lake today. The ranger station was too far back, but my research had mentioned a small outpost of Forest Service cabins near the lake. People, safety, cell reception maybe. I broke camp quickly, forcing down a protein bar and some jerky while scanning the surrounding forest. In the morning light, I could see no footprints or signs of our nighttime visitor. Luna remained unusually subdued, staying closer to me than her typical ranging pattern. The trail grew more challenging as we continued northeast, steeper, rockier, with sections washed out by previous rainfall. By midday, we'd covered another 4 miles, putting us within striking distance of the lake. My topo map showed we'd need to descend into a valley, cross a seasonal stream, then climb to a ridgeline that would eventually deliver us to the lake's southern shore. The descent into the valley marked a distinct change in the forest character. The pines thinned out, giving way to ancient gnarled oaks and maples dressed in autumn finery. Beautiful, but the reduced underbrush meant fewer places to hide should we need to. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. The seasonal stream shown on my map had swelled with recent rainfall into a fast-moving creek about 15 feet across. I scouted along its bank until finding a series of protruding rocks that could serve as stepping stones. "Come on, Luna," I called, testing the first stone with my boot. It wobbled slightly but held my weight. Luna whined, reluctant to approach the water. "It's okay, girl. We'll go slow." I stepped carefully to the second stone, then the third. Halfway across, a sound rose above the burbling water, a woman's voice calling from somewhere downstream. "Help! Please, someone help me!" I froze, nearly losing my balance. The voice was distant but clear, filled with desperate panic. "Hello!" I shouted. "Where are you?" No response except the continued pleas for help, now seeming to come from further downstream. Luna barked sharply but not toward the voice. Instead, she was looking back the way we'd come, her posture rigid with alarm. I turned to look and felt my stomach drop. A thick, unnatural fog was rolling down the valley, engulfing trees as it approached. It moved against the wind, purposeful as a hunting predator. Instinct screamed at me to run. I abandoned caution, leaping across the remaining stones and scrambling up the opposite bank. "Luna, come!" My dog hesitated only a moment before following, clearing the creek in a single powerful jump. Together, we raced uphill, the woman's cries fading behind us, consumed by the abnormal silence that preceded the fog. We reached the ridgeline just as the mist began to curl around the trees at the valley bottom. From this vantage point, I could finally see Timber Ghost Lake spread out below us, a vast, mirror-like expanse surrounded by forest, its western shore dominated by a steep cliff face. The eastern side, where the ranger had advised staying, featured a gentler slope with what appeared to be several small structures, the Forest Service outpost, presumably. Relief flooded through me. Just a mile or so more, and we'd reach relative safety. As we made our way down toward the lake, the sun broke through the clouds, warming my face and lifting my spirits slightly. Perhaps last night's encounter had been nothing more than a local trying to scare off tourists. Unnerving, yes, but explainable. The fog. Well, northern Minnesota was known for weird microclimates, wasn't it? These rationalizations died as we rounded a bend in the trail and I spotted a figure standing beside the path about 50 yards ahead. A woman with her back to us, wearing a familiar blue jacket, the same one Abigail had been wearing in the last photo taken of her before she disappeared. My heart stuttered. "Abby?" I whispered too quietly for her to hear. Luna snarled, the sound startling the figure. She turned and I staggered backward. It wore my sister's jacket, yes, but the face. The face was wrong in ways my mind struggled to process. The features were almost Abigail's, but distorted, as if someone had tried to mold clay into her likeness without ever having seen her clearly. The eyes were too large, the smile too wide, stretching literally from ear to ear. And the skin. It moved oddly, like something beneath was shifting, rearranging. "Hello, Emily," it said in Abigail's voice, perfectly, heartbreakingly accurate. "I've been waiting for you." Luna's barking became frenzied. I stood paralyzed, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. The thing that wasn't Abigail took a step toward us. "Don't you want to know what happened to me, Em? Don't you want to know where I've been?" Something in me snapped. I turned and ran, not back the way we'd come, where the unnatural fog likely still prowled, but off trail, crashing through underbrush toward the lake's eastern shore. Luna followed, her barks now interspersed with frightened whines. Behind us, Abigail's voice called out, wounded and accusatory. "Why are you running from me, Emily? Don't you love me anymore?" Branches whipped my face. My boot caught on a root, sending me sprawling. I scrambled up immediately, spitting dirt, driven by pure animal terror. The rational part of my brain had shut down entirely, leaving only the primitive instinct for survival. We burst from the tree line at the lake's edge, about half a mile south of the outpost buildings. My lungs burned, and my knees trembled with the aftermath of adrenaline. Luna paced restlessly, whimpering and looking back toward the forest. "It's okay," I gasped, though nothing was okay. "We're going to get help." I started north along the shoreline, moving as quickly as my shaking legs would allow. The sun was now low in the sky, casting long shadows across the lake's surface. Within those shadows I could swear I saw movement, shapes gliding beneath the water that were too large for fish. After about 10 minutes of rapid walking, details of the outpost became clearer. What I'd assumed were Forest Service cabins were actually a collection of ramshackle structures that looked long abandoned. No lights, no smoke from chimneys, no sign of human presence whatsoever. My last hope for immediate help evaporated, replaced by a crushing wave of despair. We were still alone out here, with night approaching and, whatever that thing was, potentially in pursuit. Luna suddenly stiffened beside me, her attention fixed on the dilapidated outpost ahead. A low growl rumbled from her chest. I squinted, trying to see what had triggered her reaction. At first, I saw nothing unusual, just weathered buildings gradually being reclaimed by nature. Then, movement caught my eye. A figure emerged from the largest structure, then another, and another. People. Relief surged through me until I realized they were moving strangely with jerky, almost mechanical gaits like marionettes controlled by an unpracticed puppeteer. As they came closer, I could make out more details. 3 men and a woman, all dressed in outdated clothing that hung loosely on their gaunt frames. Their faces were expressionless, eyes vacant. Most disturbing of all, they moved in perfect unison, as if choreographed. "Hello," I called hesitantly. "I need help. There's something in the woods." They gave no indication of hearing me. Instead, they began to spread out in a semicircle, cutting off my route along the shoreline. The woman, white-haired and bent with age, spoke in a flat monotone. "You shouldn't have come to Echo Valley." Echo Valley, the small settlement the ranger had warned about. "I'm not in Echo Valley," I replied, backing away slowly. "I'm at Timber Ghost Lake." The oldest man laughed, a dry sound like dead leaves rustling. "The lake is the valley, girl. They're one and the same." This made no geographical sense, but arguing seemed pointless. "I don't want trouble. I'm just passing through." "No one just passes through," said another man, younger but with the same vacant eyes. "The valley calls those it wants and keeps those it calls." Luna's growling intensified as they continued their slow advance. I weighed my options. The forest behind us might hold that thing wearing Abigail's face, But the lake to our right and these unsettling people before us left few alternatives. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "We want nothing," the old woman replied. "The valley wants you to replace what was taken." A chill ran through me. "Taken? What are you talking about?" "Your sister," said the youngest man, speaking for the first time. Unlike the others, his eyes held a spark of genuine emotion, pity, perhaps. "She was taken, but the valley requires balance." My mind reeled. "You know about Abigail? How?" "She disappeared in Wisconsin, hundreds of miles from here." The old woman shook her head. "The valley reaches far when it hungers. Distance means nothing to it." This was madness. These people were clearly deranged, part of some isolated community that had developed its own bizarre mythology. Yet, a treacherous part of my mind whispered, "But you saw her. You saw something wearing her face." "I'm leaving," I stated firmly, edging toward a narrow gap between two of the men. "My dog and I are walking out of here, back to the ranger station." "The fog has closed the paths," the oldest man said matter-of-factly. "There is no leaving now." As if summoned by his words, I glanced back to see tendrils of that same unnatural mist creeping through the trees behind us. The trap was nearly complete. With a sudden bark, Luna charged at the youngest man, not attacking but creating a diversion. I seized the moment, sprinting through the gap in their formation and making for the decrepit buildings. If I could get inside one, secure it somehow, perhaps I could last until morning. Surely the fog would dissipate with daylight. Luna raced after me, overtaking me easily. Together we reached the largest structure, what might once have been a trading post or community hall. Its windows were boarded, its door hanging askew on rusted hinges. I shoved my way inside, Luna slipping through ahead of me, then pushed the heavy door back into its frame as best I could. The interior was a single large room, dusty and littered with debris. Ancient shelves lined the walls, still holding a few canned goods with labels faded beyond legibility. A pot-bellied stove sat in one corner, cold and rust-pitted. The only light came from gaps in the boarded windows and a small hole in the roof, through which the darkening sky was visible. "We need to block this," I muttered, scanning the room for anything to barricade the door. Luna paced nervously, sniffing at the floorboards and whining. I dragged a heavy wooden table against the door, then added several metal folding chairs for good measure. It wouldn't stop a determined attack, but it might buy time. Outside, I could hear the four people approaching, their footsteps perfectly synchronized. They made no attempt to break in, instead positioning themselves around the building, waiting. I sank down against the far wall, exhaustion and fear temporarily overwhelming me. Luna continued her agitated exploration of the room, particularly focused on a section of floor near the center. "What is it?" "Girl!" I whispered, crawling over to investigate. The floorboards there seemed different, newer perhaps, though still weathered. As I examined them more closely, I realized they formed a trap door, complete with a recessed metal ring for lifting. My first instinct was to leave it alone. Nothing good ever came from mysterious trapdoors and horror stories. But if those people outside decided to force their way in, having an escape route might prove vital. I grasped the ring and pulled. The trapdoor resisted, then gave way with a groan of protest. Stale, cold air wafted up from the darkness below. I aimed my headlamp downward, revealing a rough-hewn staircase descending about 8 feet to what appeared to be a root cellar or storage space. Luna growled at the opening, backing away. "Yeah, I don't like it either," I agreed, but continued my examination. The cellar was roughly the same dimensions as the building above, with earthen walls reinforced by timbers. Shelves lined the walls here too, holding dusty mason jars and burlap sacks. But what grabbed my attention was the far wall, where a dark tunnel mouth gaped like an open wound in the earth. A way out. Potentially dangerous, yes, but with fog and those people surrounding us above, any alternative was worth considering. A noise from outside made my decision more urgent, the scrape of the door being pushed against my barricade. They were coming in. "Luna, come," I ordered, swinging my legs into the opening. She whined but followed reluctantly as I descended the stairs, closing the trapdoor above us. In the cellar, I fumbled for something to block the stairs should our pursuers discover our escape route. A stack of moldering wooden crates served the purpose, though they wouldn't hold for long against determined effort. With that meager protection in place, I turned my attention to the tunnel. My headlamp revealed a passage that extended beyond the beam's reach, roughly 5 feet high and 3 feet wide, requiring me to stoop. The walls were a mix of packed earth and stone, suggesting it might be partly natural, partly excavated. "This has to lead somewhere," I told Luna, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Maybe to the other buildings, or out to the forest." Luna's continued reluctance worried me. Her instincts had proven reliable so far, but as sounds of movement came from above, the barricade being dismantled, footsteps crossing the floor, I knew we had no choice. "Come on, girl, we can do this." I entered the tunnel first, crouching to avoid hitting my head. Luna followed, pressed close against my legs. The air grew colder as we advanced, with an odd mineral smell that reminded me of limestone caves I'd visited years ago. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes widening enough that I could stand upright, other times narrowing until I feared getting stuck. After what felt like hundreds of yards, I began to wonder if we were being led deeper beneath the valley rather than toward an exit. We reached a junction where the tunnel split into 3 branches. No obvious indication suggested which might lead to safety. I chose the rightmost path, reasoning that it might curve toward the lakeshore, possibly emerging some distance from the buildings and our pursuers. This new section felt different, the walls smoother with strange symbols carved at irregular intervals. My headlamp caught glints of what might have been mica or quartz embedded in the stone, creating momentary reflections like watching eyes. The tunnel began to slope downward more steeply. Water trickled along the floor, soaking my boots. Luna's anxiety was palpable now. She kept trying to turn back, only continuing because I gently urged her forward. The passage eventually opened into a larger chamber, perhaps 20 feet in diameter. My headlamp couldn't illuminate it fully, creating a maddening play of shadows at the edges of visibility. The floor was covered with shallow water, reflecting the light in disorienting patterns. As we waded cautiously forward, my beam caught something in the water ahead, something pale and elongated. At first, I thought it might be a fallen branch or piece of driftwood. Then I realized I was looking at human bones, a femur specifically, partially buried in the silt. I stifled a cry, swinging my light around in panic. More bones emerged from the darkness. A scattered rib cage, a jawless skull, vertebrae strung together by the remnants of sinew. Not one body, but many, in various states of decay, suggesting deaths had occurred here over an extended period. Luna whimpered, pressing against my legs so hard I nearly fell. I reached down to steady myself and felt something smooth and cylindrical beneath the water. Instinctively, I grasped it, pulling up a waterlogged backpack, its once bright blue fabric now mildewed and torn. With trembling hands, I unzipped the main compartment. Inside, protected in a waterproof case, was a driver's license. Abigail Hall, the sister I'd spent 3 years searching for, stared back at me from the photo. A sound echoed through the chamber then, something between a sigh and a moan, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The water around my feet began to vibrate, tiny ripples expanding outward from an unseen source. Luna barked frantically, tugging at my jacket sleeve with her teeth. Her message couldn't have been clearer. We need to leave. Now. I stumbled backward, still clutching Abigail's backpack as something began to rise from the deeper water at the chamber's center. The surface bulged upward, as if an immense bubble were forming, then split open to reveal darkness. Not an object or creature, but an absence. A perfect spherical void that hovered above the water, bending light around its edges. Within that impossible darkness, voices whispered, hundreds of them, overlapping, pleading, warning. Among them, crystal clear, was Abigail's. "Run, Emily. Don't let it take you too." I ran. Splashing blindly back the way we'd come, I abandoned caution entirely. Luna led now, her survival instinct unerring where my panicked human mind might fail. Behind us, the darkness pursued, not flowing like fog or moving like a creature, but simply being in one space. Then another, as if normal physics were merely a suggestion it occasionally indulged. We reached the junction and Luna veered left, taking a different path than the one we'd entered by. I followed without question, trusting her completely now. This new tunnel sloped upward, a good sign if we hoped to reach the surface. The whispers grew louder, closer. I risked a glance back and immediately wished I hadn't. The darkness had changed shape, elongating into something almost human-like, with limb-like protrusions that reached toward us. Within its depths, faces formed and dissolved, tortured expressions that might have been Abigail, the strange people from the outpost, or others claimed by whatever horde dwelled beneath Echo Valley. The tunnel narrowed, forcing me to drop to hands and knees. Luna somehow squeezed ahead, her white tail the only visible guide as my headlamp beam weakened, its batteries failing at the worst possible moment. Just when I feared we were trapped, Luna disappeared upward through an opening. Fresh air washed over me, carrying the scent of pine and open water. I scrambled after her, emerging inside what appeared to be a boathouse or fishing shack at the lake's edge. Moonlight streamed through gaps in the walls, illuminating a small, dilapidated structure containing little more than rotting nets and a single ancient rowboat propped on sawhorses. The door hung open, swaying slightly in the night breeze. I staggered to my feet, my whole body shaking with exhaustion and residual terror. Luna circled me anxiously, her muzzle nudging my hand in urgent encouragement. Outside, the lake stretched calm and silvery under the full moon. The outpost buildings were nowhere in sight. We must have traveled some distance through the tunnels. To my right, forest extended to the shore. To my left, the imposing cliff face that marked the lake's western boundary loomed against the starry sky. The western shore, where the ranger had warned against going. I turned to survey our options and froze. Silhouetted against the moonlit water stood 5 figures, the 4 people from the outpost and, slightly apart from them, the thing wearing Abigail's distorted face. They formed a semicircle, cutting off escape by land, leaving only the lake or the cliffs. "The valley has chosen," intoned the old woman. "A replacement has been found." "I'm not replacing anyone," I said, my voice hoarse with fear and exertion. "And I'm not staying here." The Abigail thing smiled its too wide smile. "But you already belong to the valley, Emily. Just like I did. Like we all do. You're not my sister." I clutched the recovered backpack tighter. "No," it agreed, its features rippling like disturbed water. "But I remember being her. I remember you. The valley gives me her memories, lets me wear her shape, even as it hollowed her out and took what it needed." Horror clawed at my throat. What? What did it need? "Life," said the youngest man from the outpost group. "The valley feeds on life, on potential, on the futures its chosen ones might have had. It's been hungry for so long." The thing with Abigail's face took a step closer. "But it can be merciful, Em. It offers a choice." I backed away, bumping into the rowboat. What choice? Stay willingly. Become part of Echo Valley. Let it feed slowly over years while you live among us. It gestured to the 4 people who nodded in unison. Or resist and be taken completely, as Abigail was. My mind raced. There had to be a way out, an option they weren't telling me. My gaze fell on the rowboat, then shifted to the lake. If I could get out to deep water. As if reading my thoughts, the Abigail thing laughed, a sound that started with my sister's familiar laugh but descended into something inhuman. "The lake is the valley, Emily. You cannot escape through its waters. What dwells beneath will find you." I remembered the spherical darkness rising from the underground chamber, the whispers, Abigail's warning. The lake and valley were connected by more than geography. They were somehow the same entity, or different manifestations of the same horror. Luna growled, backing toward the cliff face. Following her lead, I edged in that direction as well. And if I simply leave? Walk out the way I came in? "The fog has closed all paths," repeated the oldest man. "The valley will not release what it has claimed." I'd nearly reached the base of the cliff now. Looking up, I could see that while steep, it wasn't completely sheer. There were potential handholds, ledges, even the occasional stunted pine growing from cracks in the rock face. A desperate climb, but possibly doable. "Luna," I whispered, "can you make it up there?" She whined softly, uncertain. I had to try. For both of us. For Abigail. With sudden determination, I threw Abigail's backpack at the Abigail thing, using the moment of distraction to hoist Luna into my arms. No small feat with an 85-pound German Shepherd, and scramble for the first ledge. Luna, understanding now, wriggled free as soon as we were a body length up the cliff and began picking her own way upward, far more nimble than I expected. Below, the 5 figures watched impassively. None moved to follow. The Abigail thing called up, its voice shifting between my sisters and something ancient and hollow. "The valley's hunger reaches everywhere, Emily. Height will not save you." I ignored it, focusing entirely on the climb, hand over hand, testing each hold before trusting my weight to it. Luna somehow stayed just ahead of me, finding paths I wouldn't have seen. The moon provided enough light to work by, though shadows complicated judgments of depth. About halfway up the 100-foot cliff, I made the mistake of looking down. The 5 figures had moved to the very base of the cliff, their faces turned upward in perfect unison. Beyond them, on the lake's surface, the water was behaving strangely, rippling outward from a central point as if something massive were rising from the depths. "Don't look," I told myself, returning my attention to the climb. "Just keep moving." We ascended steadily, though my arms burned with fatigue and my fingers bled from countless small cuts on the rough stone. Luna, incredibly, seemed to be managing better than I was, her powerful legs finding purchase where I struggled. 3/4 of the way up, disaster struck. The ledge I'd just waded crumbled without warning. I fell backward, scrabbling desperately at the cliff face, managing to catch a stunted pine with one hand. The sudden jerk nearly dislocated my shoulder, and I dangled precariously, feet kicking at empty air. Luna barked frantically from a ledge just above me. I tried to swing my free hand up to secure a better hold, but my fingers, slick with blood and sweat, couldn't maintain their grip on the smooth stone. Below, the water of the lake had begun to glow with an eerie blue-green light that illuminated the underside of the fog still hovering at the tree line. The 5 figures remained motionless, watching my struggle with inhuman patience. "I can't hold on," I gasped, feeling my grip on the pine weakening. Just as my fingers began to slip, Luna did something extraordinary. She scrambled down to my ledge and clamped her jaws around my jacket sleeve, not enough to puncture my arm, but with sufficient force to stabilize me momentarily. In that brief reprieve, I caught sight of a more substantial handhold just to my right and lunged for it. My fingers found purchase on a jutting piece of granite, and I hauled myself onto a narrow ledge, gasping with relief and exertion. "Good girl," I breathed, scratching Luna behind the ears as she crowded next to me on our precarious perch. "Best dog ever." We took a moment to recover, but only a moment. From below came a sound like rushing water, though magnified 100-fold. I peered over the edge and immediately regretted it. The lake was rising, not in a natural surge or wave, but as if the entire body of water were being lifted upward in one continuous mass. The 5 figures still stood at the cliff base, unmoving despite the water now lapping at their knees, then waists. They made no attempt to escape as the impossible tide engulfed them entirely. "We need to go," I urged Luna. "Now." The final quarter of our climb was a blur of desperation. My world narrowed to the next handhold, the next ledge, Luna's encouraging whines when I struggled. Behind and below us, the sound of water grew louder, accompanied by that same haunting chorus of whispers that had filled the underground chamber. Just as my strength was failing completely, my hand grasped the cliff's upper edge. With one final, agonizing effort, I pulled myself over the top, then turned to help Luna scramble up beside me. We collapsed on solid ground, my lungs burning, muscles trembling with fatigue. For several seconds, I could only lie there, staring up at the star-filled sky, feeling the cold October air on my face. Then Luna's urgent barking roused me. I sat up to see water pouring over the cliff edge mere yards away, not as waterfalls should flow, but creeping upward like an advancing wall, defying gravity and reason. Clutching Luna's collar, I stumbled to my feet and ran blindly into the forest that crowned the cliff top. My headlamp, nearly dead now, provided just enough light to avoid crashing into trees. We pushed through underbrush, scaled fallen logs, splashed across small streams, always moving away from the lake and the horror pursuing us. After what felt like hours but might have been minutes, we burst into a small clearing. At its center stood a dilapidated fire tower, its metal frame rusted but still intact, rising about 60 feet into the night sky. Higher ground. Our only hope if the water continued its impossible advance. The tower's ladder was missing its bottom 3 rungs, requiring a desperate jump to catch the lowest intact one. I boosted Luna up first, no small feat with my depleted strength, then jumped and caught the rung with both hands, my body dangling precariously before I could pull myself up. We climbed steadily, the old metal creaking ominously beneath our weight. About halfway up, I heard it, the rushing water, the whispers, drawing nearer. Below, moonlight reflected off the advancing tide as it entered the clearing, moving with purpose rather than flowing naturally across the terrain. The tower observation platform was little more than a 6-by-6-foot square enclosure with windows on all sides, most of the glass long since shattered. An ancient radio unit sat on a rusted desk, covered in decades of dust and bird droppings. I checked it automatically without real hope and confirmed it was nothing more than a worthless relic. Luna whined, pressing her nose against one of the glassless windows. Following her gaze, I saw the water had reached the tower's base and begun spiraling up the metal supports. Not flowing upward exactly, but climbing, like some immense, formless predator. "No more running," I whispered, sinking to my knees beside Luna. Nowhere left to go. As the water rose, moonlight illuminated something floating within it. Familiar blue fabric. Abigail's backpack, somehow carried along in the impossible tide. It bumped against the platform, caught on a protruding nail, and hung there, dripping. I stared at it, an idea forming through my exhaustion and terror. The valley wanted a replacement. It had taken Abigail, was trying to take me. But what if I offered something else? Moving quickly before I could reconsider, I pulled out my wallet and removed everything personal. My driver's license, credit cards, the worn photo of Abigail and me I always carried. I stuffed these into a waterproof pouch from my pack, then added the keys to my apartment and car. "My identity," I said aloud, addressing the rising water. "That's what you want, isn't it? Who we are, not just our bodies." The water paused in its advance, hovering just below the platform. The whispers intensified, and I caught fragments of Abigail's voice among them. "Doesn't work that way. Must be living, willing sacrifice." Understanding bloomed like ice crystals in my veins. "A willing sacrifice," I repeated. "Someone who chooses to stay." Luna growled, sensing my thoughts. She nudged my hand forcefully as if saying, "Don't you dare." Not me, I assured her, stroking her fur, but something of me, something freely given. I took a deep breath and called out to the water, the valley, whatever intelligence lurked within it. I offer a bargain, not my life, but my connection to Abigail. Take my grief, my memories of her, my love for her. Let me forget she ever existed. And in return, let us leave this place. The whispers ceased abruptly. The water retreated several inches, then surged forward again, lapping at the edge of the platform. I mean it, I continued, my voice stronger now. My sister is already gone. I've spent 3 years searching, grieving. Take that part of me. It's yours willingly. But Luna and I leave, whole in body, if not in memory. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to glow with that same eerie blue-green light I'd seen in the lake. It swirled hypnotically, forming a small whirlpool directly beneath the platform. From this vortex rose a column of water that took on a vaguely humanoid shape before my eyes. It had no distinct features, yet somehow conveyed an ancient, patient malevolence. A voice spoke directly into my mind, not Abigail's nor any human voice, but something older than language itself. Acceptable. The water form extended what might have been an arm, reaching for my temple. Luna snarled and tried to interpose herself between us, but I gently held her back. It's okay, girl. Trust me. Cold, wet pressure against my forehead, then pain, white-hot and all-consuming. I might have screamed. I don't remember. Images flashed before my eyes. Abigail on her 16th birthday, blowing out candles. Abigail graduating college, tossing her cap in the air. Abigail hugging me goodbye before her weekend trip, the last time I ever saw her. Each memory seared brilliantly, then faded, leaving behind blank spaces in my mind. The pain intensified until I thought my skull would crack open. Then, abruptly, it stopped. The water form withdrew, clutching something that glowed faintly in its amorphous grasp, some ethereal essence I couldn't properly perceive. With this prize, it collapsed back into the main body of water, which immediately began to recede from the tower. I slumped to the platform floor, drained beyond exhaustion. Luna whined and licked my face anxiously. "We're okay," I murmured, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. I felt strange, lighter somehow, but with troubling gaps in my thoughts, like pages torn from a book. I knew my name, knew Luna, knew most of my life. But there were holes, absences I could sense but not identify. We stayed in the tower until dawn, watching as the unnatural water retreated entirely, leaving the forest floor damp but otherwise normal. Birds began to sing as the sky lightened. Woodland creatures rustled in the underbrush. The world seemed to settle back into its proper patterns. When we finally descended, we found regular hiking trails where none had been visible in the darkness. Trail markers pointed toward a ranger station just 3 miles north. My phone, dead since the previous day, caught a signal when I powered it up after connecting it to my portable charger. We were found by a search party that afternoon. Apparently, I'd been reported missing when I failed to check in at the designated time. The rangers were surprised we'd ended up so far off my planned route, but accepting of my explanation that I'd gotten turned around in foggy conditions. No one mentioned Echo Valley or questioned the strange state of my gear and clothing. No one asked about the scratches on my hands and face or the haunted look Luna still wore. The head ranger who debriefed me was named Frank, but he wasn't the same man who'd warned me at the trailhead. This Frank had never heard of Timber Ghost Lake, insisting it wasn't on any official maps of Superior National Forest. "You must be thinking of another park," he said kindly, not quite meeting my eyes. That was 2 months ago. Luna and I have settled back into our normal lives. I returned to my accounting job, she to her routine of morning walks and evening cuddles. Sometimes I catch her watching me with an odd intensity, as if waiting for me to remember something important. But what that might be, I can't imagine. There are odd gaps in my apartment, spaces where it seems something should be, but isn't. A blank spot on my bookshelf. An empty photo frame I must have purchased but never filled. These things trouble me briefly before fading from attention. Sometimes I wake at night, heart racing from dreams I can't recall. In these moments, Luna always comes to me, resting her head on my chest until my breathing steadies. She's become strangely protective, growling at fog and refusing to go near lakes or large bodies of water. Last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a blue backpack, water-stained but otherwise intact. I didn't recognize it, yet felt an inexplicable chill upon seeing it. Luna barked frantically until I sealed it back in its shipping box and placed it in the dumpster behind my building. I should have questioned this more, I suppose. Should have wondered why a stranger would send me a used backpack, or why it affected me so strongly. But whenever I try to focus on these puzzles, my thoughts slide away, redirected to mundane concerns. Work, bills, the weather. I know something happened in those Minnesota woods. Something beyond normal experience, beyond rational explanation. The evidence is there in my nightmares, in Luna's behavior, in the strange blank spaces in my memory and home. But I made a bargain, it seems. And whatever I sacrificed, whatever I chose to forget, perhaps it's better this way. Some prices are worth paying to escape Echo Valley. Sometimes, though, when I'm on the edge of sleep, I catch myself listening for whispers beneath the normal sounds of night. And in those moments, I swear I hear a woman's voice calling my name, familiar and beloved, though I can't place who it might belong to. I never answer. Some calls are best left unanswered. Some valleys best left unexplored. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the remote woodlands of the Superior National Forest in northern Minnesota, just outside a tiny, unincorporated settlement called Echo Valley, and that's all I remember. That's all I'm allowed to remember. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota, just last autumn. I'd always been an avid solo hiker. Something about the solitude of the wilderness called to me. My therapist said it was an unhealthy coping mechanism after my divorce, but I preferred to think of it as reclaiming my independence. The Boundary Waters had been on my bucket list for years, with its 1,000 pristine lakes and ancient boreal forests stretching to the Canadian border. I'd read about its remoteness, the absolute silence that could envelop you there when the wind stopped, how the night sky blazed with stars unpolluted by city lights. What I hadn't properly appreciated was how utterly isolated you could become once you ventured a few miles from the entry points. Cell reception disappeared immediately. GPS signals grew unreliable under the dense canopy, and in autumn, when most tourists had gone, you could go days without seeing another human. That was exactly what I wanted. I'd planned a week-long trek, following a route that would take me through some of the more secluded portions of the park. My outfitter in Ely, a grizzled man named Walt with hands like tree bark, had raised his eyebrows when I told him I'd be going alone in October. "Weather's unpredictable this time of year," he warned, studying my gear with a critical eye. "Gets dark early too, and you're heading into the Echo Trail area. Pretty remote stuff." "That's the idea," I'd replied with more confidence than I felt. Walt just shook his head. "Well, at least take this." He handed me an emergency satellite beacon. Just in case. I nearly refused it. I didn't want any tethers to civilization, but something in his weathered face made me reconsider. I tucked the small device into my pack and thanked him. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. The forest blazed with autumn colors, crimson maples, golden birch, and the deep green of ancient pines. The lakes were mirror calm in the mornings, reflecting perfect inverted images of the shoreline. I established a rhythm. Hike, make camp, cook my simple meals, sleep under the stars when weather permitted. My muscles ached pleasantly from paddling and portaging my canoe between lakes. It was on the third day that I first noticed something was wrong. I was deep in the park by then, following the Little Indian Sioux River northward. The day had started gray and misty with a dampness that seeped into everything. Around midday, I stopped to check my map and compass. According to my calculations, I should have reached Loon Lake hours ago, but instead, I was still following the meandering river through increasingly unfamiliar terrain. I rechecked my compass. The needle swung lazily, then settled, pointing west. That couldn't be right. I'd been heading north all morning, and the river should have been flowing south. I tapped the compass, thinking it might be malfunctioning, but the needle remained stubbornly fixed. A flicker of unease passed through me. I pulled out my backup compass from the waterproof pouch in my pack. This one pointed southeast. "That's not possible," I muttered to myself, voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. I tried my GPS unit next. The screen flickered to life, showed my position briefly at coordinates that made no sense given where I should be, then went dark. When I restarted it, it showed me in a completely different location, nearly 20 miles from where I'd been a moment before. Deep breaths, Emily. Technology fails sometimes. That's why you learned traditional navigation. I put away the electronic devices and unfolded my paper map, tracing the river with my finger. If I could just identify some landmark, a distinctive bend in the river or an unusual rock formation, I might reorient myself. That's when I noticed the silence. In the woods, there's never true silence. There's always something. Wind in the trees, birds calling, small animals moving through underbrush, the gentle lap of water against the shore. But at that moment, every sound had been smothered, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I stood motionless, straining to hear anything. My heartbeat sounded obscenely loud in my ears. Then, just as the silence became unbearable, I heard it. A faint sound like distant singing, carried on air that had suddenly turned cold enough to make my breath plume in front of me. The voice was high and clear, singing words I couldn't quite make out. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, away from the river. Against every instinct screaming at me to get back in my canoe and paddle away, I found myself walking toward it, pushing through the underbrush, branches catching at my clothes like grasping fingers. The singing grew louder as I approached, though still indistinct. It had a melancholy quality that made my chest ache with a longing I couldn't name. I emerged into a small clearing and the singing abruptly stopped. In the center of the clearing stood a single, massive white pine, far larger than any of the surrounding trees. Its trunk was so wide it would have taken 3 people with outstretched arms to encircle it. But what stopped me cold was what hung from its branches. Dozens of small bundles dangled from the lower limbs, gently swaying though there was no breeze. They looked like crude dolls made from twigs, pine needles, and what appeared to be animal fur, bound together with something dark and fibrous. Each had a rough approximation of a face, dark hollows where eyes should be. My skin crawled as I stared at them. This wasn't the work of park rangers or any official marker. It reminded me of something I'd read about, warning totems created by indigenous peoples to mark places where the boundary between worlds grew thin, places to be avoided. As I backed away, my boot heel struck something solid. I looked down and nearly screamed. Half buried in the forest floor was a canoe paddle, weathered and gray with age but still recognizable. Carved into its handle was a name, Anne Hughes, 1978. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. According to the news articles I'd read while planning my trip, Anne Hughes was one of the Boundary Water's most famous missing persons cases. A solo camper who had vanished without a trace nearly 50 years ago. And I was holding her paddle. I dropped it as if it had burned me and turned to flee back to the river, to my canoe, to safety. But the forest had changed. The clear path I'd followed was gone, replaced by dense underbrush that hadn't been there minutes before. I spun around, disoriented, the tree with its macabre decorations now nowhere in sight. Panic rose in my throat, I forced it down, trying to think logically. The river couldn't be far. I just needed to listen for the sound of water. But the unnatural silence had returned, thick and smothering. I picked a direction that felt right and began walking quickly, pushing through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches that whipped against my face and arms. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, I broke through to the riverbank, relief flooding through me at the sight of my red canoe still pulled up on the rocky shore. As I approached it, however, my relief curdled into fresh horror. My canoe wasn't alone. Pulled up beside it was another canoe, ancient and weathered, its once bright paint faded to ghostly shades of green and gray. Inside, it lay a rotting backpack, designs and fabric from decades past, and a camera with the type of film that hadn't been manufactured in 30 years. I backed away, then froze as something moved in my peripheral vision. Across the river, at the edge of the tree line, stood a figure. It was a woman, or what remained of one. She wore hiking clothes that might once have been colorful but now hung in moldering tatters from her gaunt frame. Her hair was long and matted with leaves and twigs. Even from this distance, I could see that her skin had a grayish cast, like something that had been underwater too long. She stood perfectly still, watching me. Then, with a movement that was too fluid to be natural, she raised one arm and pointed directly at me. I didn't think. I grabbed my emergency beacon from my pack, pressed the SOS button, then launched my canoe and paddled frantically downstream, away from the apparition, away from the ghostly canoe, away from the singing and the doll tree and everything wrong about this place. Night fell with unnatural swiftness as I paddled. The river seemed to widen, then narrow, then fork in ways that didn't match my memory or my map. Several times I had to portage around deadfalls or rapids that shouldn't have been there. My arms burned with fatigue, but terror kept me moving. By the time exhaustion forced me to make camp, stars were scattered across the sky like spilled salt. I dragged my canoe well up onto shore and secured it tightly, then set up my tent with trembling hands. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness between the trees. I should have built a fire, but some instinct warned me against it. Instead, I crawled into my tent, zipping the door closed and securing it from the inside. I placed my hunting knife beside my sleeping bag and turned on my small lantern, unwilling to face the absolute darkness. Sleep seemed impossible, but eventually, my exhausted body overrode my terrified mind, and I drifted into uneasy dreams filled with singing voices and hollow-eyed watchers. I woke to scratching sounds against the outside of my tent. Light filtered through the nylon walls, but it was the strange, diffuse light of heavy fog, revealing nothing of the world outside. The scratching continued, light, almost tentative, like curious fingers exploring the unfamiliar texture. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. The scratching stopped. Then, after a pause that stretched my nerves to breaking, "Emily." It was a woman's voice, but wrong somehow, as if spoken through water, bubbling and distorted. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, clutching my knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. "I know all the lonely ones who come here," the voice replied. "The ones running from something, like Anne, like me." My breath caught. "Who are you?" "Margaret Wilson," the voice said. That was my name. Before. Margaret Wilson. Another name from the articles I'd read, a hiker who'd disappeared in 1992, her campsite found undisturbed except for strange markings carved into nearby trees. "You're not real," I whispered. "You can't be real." "Open your tent, Emily," Margaret's voice coaxed. "See for yourself." Every cell in my body screamed against it, but some compulsion moved my hand toward the zipper. I stopped myself, fingers trembling inches from the pull. "No," I said more firmly. "Whatever you are, you're not Margaret Wilson. Go away." A sound came then, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, but something horribly in between. We're all real here, Emily. We're all what the forest made us. And soon, you'll be one of us, too." The tent wall bulged inward as something pressed against it from outside, something far larger than human fingers. I scrambled backward, knife held out before me. "I called for help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They'll be looking for me by now." "Others have called for help," Margaret's voice said, now seeming to come from all around the tent. "The forest doesn't let signals through, not from the hollow places." The pressure against the tent wall increased, the nylon stretching to its limit. In desperation, I slashed at it with my knife, cutting a jagged opening. Cool mist poured in, along with the smell of decaying vegetation and something else, something coppery and organic that made my stomach turn. I lunged through the opening, expecting to confront whatever horror waited outside. But there was nothing. Just my small campsite wrapped in a blanket of fog so thick I could barely see 10 feet in any direction. My canoe was gone. I spun around, scanning the shoreline in panic. The river itself seemed to have receded overnight, leaving a wide expanse of mud between my campsite and the water. And there, leading away across the mud, were footprints. My footprints from when I'd brought my canoe ashore, except they weren't leading away from the water anymore. They were leading into it, as if I'd emerged from the river rather than approached it. My mind rebelled against what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. I turned back to my tent, intending to quickly pack what I could carry and try to hike out, only to find the tent was gone too. In its place was a crude shelter of branches and pine boughs, rotting and sagging with age and exposure. Inside, barely visible in the gloom, lay a sleeping bag. Not my modern, lightweight one, but an old-fashioned mummy bag. Its once blue fabric now mildewed and torn. Protruding from the top of the bag was a human hand, the skin gray and withered, the fingers curled as if reaching for something forever beyond its grasp. I stumbled backward, a scream rising in my throat that I barely managed to choke back. I couldn't tear my eyes from that hand, from the glint of metal on one finger, a wedding ring, tarnished with age. My wedding ring, the one I'd continued to wear on a chain around my neck after the divorce, unable to fully let go. The fog swirled around me, thickening until I could barely see the grotesque shelter. From somewhere in the white nothingness came the singing again, louder now and accompanied by the sounds of splashing water. I ran. I didn't care what direction, didn't try to navigate, just crashed through underbrush and over fallen logs. Branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me with every stride. My only thought was to get away. From the shelter, from the hand, from the implications too terrible to contemplate. I don't know how long I ran before I broke through to another clearing. This one was larger than the first, and dominated not by a single tree but by a ring of them. Ancient pines growing in a perfect circle around a still black pool of water. The fog had thinned here, allowing watery sunlight to filter through the canopy above. The unnatural silence had returned, broken only by my ragged breathing. At the edge of the pool stood a figure with its back to me. A woman in modern hiking clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Relief surged through me. Another person. Someone real, not some forest apparition. "Hello," I called, my voice hoarse. "Thank God. Can you help me? I'm lost, and something very strange is happening." The figure turned slowly, and the words died in my throat. It was me. Or rather, something wearing my face. It had my features, my clothes, my backpack, but the eyes were wrong. Flat and black, with none of the terror that must have been plain on my own face. It smiled, an expression that stretched my face in ways that human muscles shouldn't allow. "Hello, Emily," it said in my voice. "I've been waiting for you." I backed away, shaking my head in mute denial. "Don't be afraid," my doppelganger said, still with that terrible smile. "The transition is almost complete. Soon you won't remember anything else." "What are you talking about?" I managed to ask, though my mouth had gone dust dry. The forest needs new guardians sometimes, it explained, gesturing toward the black pool. The old ones can only last so long before they deteriorate, like poor Margaret, like Anne before her. It stepped toward me, movements fluid but somehow wrong, as if its limbs had too many joints. You were perfect, it continued, so alone, so full of pain, running from a life you couldn't bear to return to. The forest called to you, and you answered. Another step closer. I tried to retreat further but found myself rooted to the spot, unable to move. Your body will wander out of here eventually, it said. It will go home, resume your life. No one will know the difference. And you'll stay here, with us, keeping others away from the hollow places. It reached out with my hand, fingers inches from my face. It won't hurt, it promised. You're already halfway there. You crossed over the moment you heard the singing. Its fingers brushed my cheek, cold as pond water, and suddenly I could move again. I struck out wildly, knocking its hand away and turned to flee, only to find myself facing the black pool. Somehow, impossibly, we had changed positions. The water of the pool began to ripple, though there was no wind. From its depths rose a sound, the collective singing of countless voices, harmonizing in that same eerie, wordless melody I'd been hearing. My doppelganger's hands closed around my shoulders from behind. "Look," it whispered in my ear, "see what you'll become." The surface of the pool turned reflective, but it didn't show the sky above. Instead, I saw faces, dozens of them, pressing up from below as if against glass. Men and women, their features distorted by the water and by something else, a wrongness that made their eyes too large, their mouths too wide. I recognized some of them from missing persons reports spanning decades. Anne Hughes, Margaret Wilson, and others whose names I couldn't recall, all staring up at me with the same hollow, hungry expression. All waiting for me to join them. No. I twisted free with strength born of absolute terror, shoving my doppelganger backward. It stumbled, surprise flickering across its stolen features, then toppled into the pool with a splash that seemed far too loud for its size. The water churned and frothed as if boiling. Arms, too many arms, reached up from the depths, pulling the creature down. It thrashed briefly, its face contorting into a mask of rage that looked nothing like mine anymore, before disappearing beneath the surface. The pool went still again, its surface once more just stagnant water reflecting the trees above. I didn't wait to see what might emerge next. I ran again, in what I hoped was the direction of the river. The forest seemed to fight me at every step, branches reaching down to snag my clothes, roots rising up to trip me, the very air growing thick and resistant, and all around me the singing followed. Sometimes distant, sometimes so close it seemed to be coming from inside my own head. I don't know how long I ran or how far. Time lost meaning in that place. The light never seemed to change, the same diffuse, foggy illumination that cast no shadows and gave no hint of the sun's position. Eventually, I burst through a final stand of trees and found myself on a shoreline. Not the narrow riverbank where I'd lost my canoe, but the wide, rocky beach of a large lake. And there, pulled up on the shore, was a canoe. Not my red one, but an aluminum Park Service canoe with Ranger stenciled on its side in fading letters. I approached it cautiously, half expecting another ghost or doppelganger to materialize. But there was only the canoe, a paddle lying beside it, and blessed, normal silence broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I didn't question this miracle. I dragged the canoe into the water, climbed in, and began paddling with renewed strength, staying close to the shoreline to maintain my bearings. As I rounded a small peninsula, my heart leapt. In the distance was a cluster of buildings, the ranger station at the Lake One entry point, where I'd registered my trip nearly a week ago. I paddled furiously, afraid at any moment that the station would disappear or transform into something horrific. But it remained solidly, blessedly real, growing larger as I approached. By the time I reached the dock, my arms were trembling with exhaustion. I half fell out of the canoe, stumbling up the wooden planks toward the main building. A startled ranger, a real, human ranger, emerged at the sound of my approach. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, taking in my wild appearance, the cuts and bruises from my headlong flight through the forest. I tried to speak but could only shake my head, tears suddenly streaming down my face. "Okay, it's okay," he said, guiding me gently inside. "You're safe now. Let's get you warmed up." The next few hours passed in a blur. I gave a statement that carefully omitted the more incredible aspects of my experience. I'd become lost, I explained. My equipment had failed. I'd panicked and abandoned my canoe. Standard wilderness misadventure. The ranger, whose name was Mike, listened sympathetically. He made no mention of my emergency beacon, which confirmed what Margaret's voice had told me. No signal had gotten through. "You're lucky you found one of our patrol canoes," he said as I sipped hot coffee with shaking hands, though I'm not sure what it was doing at Snowbank Lake. That's pretty far from its usual station. I froze mid-sip. "Snowbank Lake?" Mike nodded. "That's where you came in from just now." That was impossible. Snowbank Lake was nearly 30 miles from where I should have been. There was no way I could have covered that distance on foot in less than a day, especially through pathless wilderness, unless time had stretched in that place. Unless... "What day is it?" I asked suddenly. Mike looked concerned. "Friday, October 21st. I set down my mug before I could drop it. I'd entered the Boundary Waters on Monday, October 10th, 11 days ago. "I think you should see a doctor," Mike said gently, misinterpreting my shock. "You're probably dehydrated, and some of those cuts might need attention." I nodded numbly, allowing myself to be led to a waiting park vehicle. As we drove away from the station, I looked back toward the wilderness I'd escaped. For just a moment, through a gap in the trees, I thought I saw figures standing at the edge of the forest, shadowy silhouettes watching the vehicle depart. Then they were gone, and there was only the endless green of the pines. I've told myself many times since then that none of it was real, that I experienced some combination of exhaustion, dehydration, and panic that produced vivid hallucinations, that the lost time can be explained by my wandering in confusion, perhaps even with temporary amnesia. I've almost convinced myself. Almost. But I don't go hiking alone anymore, and sometimes when the wind blows through pine trees, I think I can hear distant singing, a melancholy melody that calls to something inside me, something that knows the truth. The forest is patient. It can wait. And sometimes in my dreams, I see the black pool with its waiting faces. Only now, among them is one that wears the features of the thing that stole my face, the guardian that I escaped but did not destroy. It's still there in that hollow place between worlds, and it still has my face, my identity, my pain, waiting for me to return and complete what began that autumn in the Boundary Waters. I never will, but sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder, what if I already have? What if this life, this escape, is the illusion? What if, even now, I'm sinking slowly into that black pool, joining the others who came to the wilderness alone, running from lives they couldn't bear? What if the singing I sometimes hear isn't a memory, but a summons? A summons I won't be able to resist forever. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Superior National Forest in northern Minnesota, not far from the Boundary Waters canoe area. My boyfriend Tyler and I had been planning this trip for months, a chance to disconnect, to breathe fresh air, to escape the suffocating routine of our corporate jobs in Minneapolis. We'd been dating for 2 years, and things had grown comfortable, maybe too comfortable. We thought the wilderness might rekindle something. Instead, it awakened something else entirely. Tyler was the outdoorsy type, tall, lean, with perpetually tanned skin from weekend excursions. He smiled, and in the firelight, his teeth seemed too numerous, too sharp. "They've been watching us from the beginning, Emily. From the moment we entered these woods. The Black Pines, they call this place. Locals know better than to come here, especially in autumn. That's when they're hungriest." I continued backing away, my mouth dry with terror. "Who are they, Tyler? What's happening to you?" "The Old Ones. The first inhabitants of this land. They've been here long before humans built their cities, their roads." His voice dropped to a whisper. "They showed me things while you slept, Emily. Beautiful, terrible things. The true nature of these woods. Of all woods." I glanced frantically around, looking for an escape route, but the darkness beyond our campsite was absolute, and I could hear movement all around us now. Soft footfalls on pine needles, the rustle of branches being pushed aside. "You're not Tyler," I realized, horror washing over me like ice water. "What have you done with him?" The thing wearing Tyler's face tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with eyes that suddenly reflected the firelight like an animal's. "I am Tyler. What's left of him. He's still in here, watching, screaming." It tapped its temple. "He's been so worried about you. Emily, about what's going to happen to you." I bolted then, blind panic driving me into the darkness of the forest. Behind me, I heard that thing, not Tyler, laugh, a sound that started human but rose to one of those inhuman cries. And it was answered, all around me as I crashed through the underbrush. I ran without direction, without thought, branches tearing at my face and arms, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I could hear them pursuing, not just behind me but on all sides, moving through the trees with inhuman speed and grace, and then the ground disappeared beneath my feet. I was falling, tumbling down a steep slope, rocks and branches battering my body as I rolled helplessly toward whatever waited below. I came to a rest at the bottom, dazed and battered. Above me, I could hear them coming, those soft footfalls drawing closer. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain from what I suspected were cracked ribs, and stumbled forward into the darkness. My hand found rough bark, a tree, massive and ancient. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, trying to orient myself, and then I felt it. A vibration running through the wood, a pulse like a massive, slow heartbeat. I jerked away as if burned, a new kind of horror dawning. The trees, they were part of it. All of it. The forest, the creatures, even Tyler. They were all connected, all aspects of some ancient, incomprehensible entity. I staggered forward, no longer running, simply trying to put distance between myself and that pulsing tree. The night was absolute now, not even starlight penetrating the canopy above. I moved by feel, hands outstretched to avoid obstacles, and then my fingers touched something sticky and wet. I recoiled instinctively, but not before recognizing the unmistakable texture of half-congealed blood. A match flared to life in front of me, momentarily blinding. As my eyes adjusted to the sudden light, I found myself looking into the face of an old woman, ancient, her skin deeply lined and weathered, her eyes milky with cataracts. She stood in the entrance to what appeared to be a small cave, the match held aloft in fingers gnarled as tree roots. Behind her, I could make out crude furnishings, a pallet of pine boughs, a small fire pit. "Quick, child," she croaked, her voice like dry leaves rustling. "Inside, before they come." I hesitated, torn between fear of this stranger and the certainty of what pursued me through the dark woods. "Now," she hissed, reaching out to grab my wrist with surprising strength. She pulled me into the cave, quickly dropping a hide curtain across the entrance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke. The old woman moved to the fire pit, adding small twigs to the embers there, coaxing them into a flame. "You've led them on quite a chase," she said, eyeing me critically in the growing firelight. "Been a while since anyone's lasted this long." "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my distance despite the small confines of the cave. What are those things out there? What happened to Tyler? The old woman cackled, a sound like stones grinding together. So many questions, just like all the others. She settled herself on a crude stool. Name's Agatha Blackwood. Been living in these woods longer than you've been alive, girl. What are those things? I repeated, desperation edging my voice. Agatha's milky eyes seemed to look through me rather than at me. The old ones. Been here since the ice retreated. Waiting, watching, feeding. Feeding? On what? Her smile revealed teeth worn down to nubs. What do you think, girl? They feed on fear, on pain, on flesh and bone, when they can get it. I felt my stomach lurch. Tyler? Your young man? Agatha nodded. They've taken him, hollowed him out and filled him with themselves. They do that sometimes, when they find someone receptive. What do you mean, receptive? She shrugged. Some folks are more open to them than others. People with darkness already in them, or doubt, or fear. They can slip right in, like water through cracks in a dam. I thought of Tyler's odd behavior since we'd arrived in these woods. His growing silence, his strange moods. Had there been signs I'd missed? Some darkness in him I'd never recognized? Can he be saved? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Agatha's face softened slightly. No, child. What they take, they keep. He's gone. I slumped against the cave wall, the reality of it crushing down on me. Tyler was gone. I was alone in these nightmare woods, hunted by creatures I didn't understand. Why are you helping me? I asked finally. How have you survived here? Agatha's laugh was bitter. Who says I've survived? Maybe I'm as much a part of these woods as they are now. I eyed her warily. Are you like them? She considered this, head tilted. Not like them, no, but not like you anymore either. I've been here too long, seen too much. She gestured to the cave around us. They leave me be, mostly. I'm too old, too tough for their tastes, and I know things they want kept quiet. What things? Agatha leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper though we were alone. How to harm them, how to escape them. The old ones, they're powerful, ancient, but they're not invulnerable. Hope kindled in my chest. You know how to kill them? Kill? She laughed again. No, child. They can't be killed, not really. They're as much a part of this forest as the trees, the rocks. But they can be discouraged, weakened, and with the right preparation you might make it out of their territory alive. Tell me, I pleaded. Please, I need to get out of here. Agatha studied me for a long moment, those milky eyes somehow seeing more than they should. It'll cost you, she said finally. Nothing's free in these woods. Cost me what? I don't have anything. Her gnarled finger pointed to my chest. Blood, just a little, freely given. That's my price. I hesitated, every instinct screaming that this was wrong, dangerous. But what choice did I have? Stay here and eventually be taken by those things, like Tyler. Fine, I said, if that's what it takes. Agatha nodded, seemingly satisfied. She shuffled to the back of the cave, rummaging through what looked like a collection of jars and bundles of dried herbs. She returned with a small stone bowl and a bone knife, its edge honed to razor sharpness. Your palm, she instructed. Just a small cut. I reluctantly extended my hand. The knife was cold against my skin, then hot as it bit into my flesh. Blood welled up, dripping into the stone bowl. Enough, Agatha said when the bowl contained perhaps a tablespoon of my blood. She pressed a scrap of cloth against my cut, then moved back to her collection of herbs. She worked methodically, mixing my blood with various powders and dried plants, muttering under her breath in a language I didn't recognize. The resulting paste was dark, almost black, with a metallic scent that made my nose wrinkle. Here, she said, presenting me with the bowl. Mark yourself with this. Forehead, throat, wrists, ankles. Do it now, before the blood dries. I dipped my fingers into the paste, surprised at its warmth, and did as instructed, drawing crude symbols at the points she'd indicated. The paste tingled against my skin, not unpleasantly. Good, Agatha nodded. Now listen carefully. The marks will hide you from their sight, but not perfectly. Move quietly, stay low to the ground. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't stop. Head southeast, toward the rising sun. You'll find a stream with rocks that form stepping stones. Cross there. They can't follow over running water. What about Tyler? I asked. I can't just leave him. He's gone. Agatha cut me off, her voice hard. What wears his skin now isn't him. Remember that, or you'll join him. She moved to the cave entrance, peering out through a gap in the hide curtain. It's almost dawn. They'll be retreating soon. That's when you'll go. We waited in silence as the night gradually gave way to the faintest lightening of the sky visible through the cave entrance. Agatha kept watch, occasionally muttering to herself or making small gestures with her gnarled hands. Finally, she turned to me. It's time. They've withdrawn to their hollows for the day. You have perhaps 8 hours before they stir again. Use it well. I rose on shaky legs, gathering what little strength I had left. Thank you, I said. Will you be safe here? Agatha's laugh was dry as old bones. I'm always safe, child, and never safe. Go now. Don't look back. I slipped past the hide curtain into the gray light of early dawn. The forest was silent, the air heavy with mist that clung to the trees like ghostly shrouds. I oriented myself as best I could, locating the lightening sky to the east, and began moving southeast as Agatha had instructed. The forest looked different in the dawn light, less menacing but somehow sadder, older. I picked my way carefully through the underbrush, alert for any sign of those creatures, or of the thing that had once been Tyler. I walked for what felt like hours, the rising sun occasionally visible through breaks in the canopy, guiding my way. My body ached from the fall down the slope, and hunger gnawed at my belly, but I pushed on, driven by the memory of those inhuman cries in the night. And then I heard it. Water. The soft burble of a stream somewhere ahead. Hope surged through me, lending new strength to my tired legs. I quickened my pace, pushing through a tangle of brambles toward the sound. The stream lay before me, perhaps 10 feet wide, its water clear and swift flowing over a rocky bed. And there, just as Agatha had said, was a line of stepping stones, flat rocks arranged in a rough path across the water. I moved toward them, relief washing over me. But as I reached the bank, a voice called from behind me. "Emily!" I froze, my blood turning to ice. I knew that voice. It was Tyler's voice, but not Tyler's voice. Something else using his vocal cords, his memories. Slowly, I turned. He stood at the edge of the clearing, looking almost normal in the daylight. Almost, but not quite. He stood too still, his posture subtly wrong, as if his spine had extra vertebrae. His eyes, when they met mine, were Tyler's warm brown, but something else looked out from behind them. Something old and hungry. "Don't go, Emily," it said in Tyler's voice. "Please, I miss you. I'm scared without you." I backed toward the stream, saying nothing. It took a step forward, Tyler's face contorting into an expression of hurt that was almost convincing. "It's me, Em. It's really me. I fought them off. I came back for you." "You're not Tyler," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Its expression changed then, hardening into something predatory. "No," it agreed, its voice shifting to something deeper, resonant. "But I have all his memories. I know how he felt about you. I know what he wanted to do to you in his darkest thoughts." It took another step toward me. "Stay with us, Emily. Be part of the forest. It's peaceful here once you understand, once you surrender." I continued backing toward the stream. "No," I said, "never." It smiled then, Tyler's familiar smile twisted into something terrible. "You think that old witch's blood marks will save you? They're already fading." It gestured to my forearm, where the symbol Agatha had instructed me to draw was indeed growing fainter, the paste flaking away. "You belong to us now. This forest has tasted your blood. It knows you." I turned and ran for the stepping stones, adrenaline flooding my system. Behind me, I heard it give chase, no longer bothering to maintain its human pretense. Its footfalls were strange. Too many of them, too quick, like something with more than 2 legs was pursuing me. I reached the first stone and leapt onto it, nearly losing my balance as my boot slipped on the wet surface. I recovered, jumping to the next stone and the next, the sound of my pursuer growing closer with each second. I was halfway across when I risked a glance back. What I saw nearly made me miss the next stone entirely. The thing that had been Tyler was changing as it ran, its form elongating, limbs stretching to impossible lengths. Its face was melting, features running like wax, revealing something beneath that wasn't a face at all, just eyes. Dozens of them, staring from a mass of writhing tissue. I turned away, choking down bile, and forced myself to focus on the stepping stones. 3 more, 2 more, 1 more. My feet hit the far bank just as I felt something cold brush against my back, a grasping hand or claw or something worse. I stumbled forward, expecting at any moment to feel it seize me, drag me back into the water. But nothing happened. After several frantic steps, I finally turned to look. The creature stood at the edge of the stream, Tyler's form now completely gone, replaced by something tall and thin and wrong, a body like a twisted tree trunk, limbs too numerous and too jointed, a head that constantly shifted shape as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. It watched me with those many eyes, and I had the distinct impression it was frustrated, angry. It made no move to cross the stream. Agatha had been right. They couldn't cross running water. I backed away, unwilling to turn my back on it despite the apparent safety of the barrier between us. The creature remained at the water's edge, watching, waiting. Finally, it made a sound. Not one of those inhuman cries, but a voice, still recognizably Tyler's despite the monstrous form that produced it. "This isn't over, Emily," it said. "These woods go on for miles. You'll need to sleep eventually, and when you do, we'll be waiting." Then it turned and melted back into the trees, its form seeming to blur and fade until it was indistinguishable from the surrounding forest. I stood there for a long time, waiting to see if it would return, if there were others. But the forest on this side of the stream was quiet, seemingly empty. Finally, exhaustion and hunger forced me to move. I needed to find food, shelter, some sign of civilization. I continued southeast as Agatha had instructed, the sun now high overhead, guiding my way. The forest on this side of the stream felt different, younger, less oppressive. Normal birds called from the trees, and twice I startled deer that bounded away through the underbrush. As the day wore on, I began to despair. My strength was fading, the marks Agatha had drawn on my skin completely gone now. What if I couldn't find my way out before nightfall? What if those things could cross the stream after dark? And then, as the sun was beginning to dip toward the western horizon, I heard it, the distant rumble of an engine. A vehicle somewhere ahead. I broke into a stumbling run, pushing myself toward that sound, that promise of human presence. The trees began to thin, and suddenly, gloriously, I was standing at the edge of the forest looking down at a 2-lane highway winding through the valley below. Tears sprang to my eyes as I half ran, half fell down the slope toward the road. I reached the shoulder just as a pickup truck came around the bend, its headlights already on against the gathering dusk. I waved frantically, knowing what I must look like. Filthy, bloodied, wild-eyed. The truck slowed, then stopped, an older man in a flannel shirt leaning out the window. "Jesus, miss, are you okay?" he asked, taking in my appearance with alarm. "I was lost," I managed to say, my voice cracking with emotion. "In the forest. My boyfriend. There was an accident. Please, can you take me to the nearest town? I need to call for help." The man hesitated only a moment before nodding, reaching across to open the passenger door. "Get in. Eveleth's about 20 minutes from here." I climbed into the truck, relief making me lightheaded. As we pulled away, I cast one last glance back at the forest rising dark and impenetrable on the hillside. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement among the trees. Tall, thin figures watching from the shadows. "You're lucky," the man said as we drove. "Folks get lost in the Black Pines all the time. Not everyone finds their way out." I turned to him sharply. "The Black Pines? Is that what that forest is called?" He nodded, keeping his eyes on the winding road. "Yep. Bad place. Local legends say it's haunted or cursed. Indigenous people in these parts never went in there, even before European settlers arrived." He glanced at me. "What happened to your boyfriend? Should we go back for him?" I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "No, he's gone. They took him." The man shot me a concerned look but didn't press further, likely assuming I was in shock. We drove in silence for a while, the distance between me and that nightmare forest growing with each passing minute. But even as we reached the outskirts of Eveleth, its lights glowing warmly against the darkening sky, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of those woods. Not physically, perhaps, but a presence, a shadow that had attached itself to me. Sometimes, even now, months later, I wake in the night to the sound of scratching at my bedroom window. And in my dreams, I hear Tyler's voice calling to me, begging me to return to the Black Pines, where he's waiting, where they're all waiting. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see something in my eyes that wasn't there before. Something old and patient and hungry, something that's biding its time, because the thing that wore Tyler's face was right about one thing. The forest tasted my blood. It knows me now, and one day, I fear, it will call me back. I'd grown up camping with his family and could identify every tree, every bird call. I was the city girl, more comfortable with concrete than pine needles, but I loved his enthusiasm. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about the stars you could see when you escaped the city lights. "This is the spot," Tyler announced as we reached a clearing about 7 miles from where we'd parked. We'd been hiking for nearly 4 hours along the Kikakabik Trail, one of the most remote paths in the state. "According to the map, we're near Echo Lake." I dropped my pack with a groan of relief. My shoulders ached, and despite the late September chill, sweat trickled down my spine. "Thank God. I was beginning to think you were leading me into the wilderness to murder me," I joked. Tyler didn't laugh. Instead, he scanned the tree line, his expression oddly tense. "Did you hear that?" I paused, listening. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the occasional creak of ancient pines swaying in the breeze. "Hear what?" He shook his head. "Nothing. Let's set up camp before it gets dark." We worked in tandem, Tyler pitching the tent while I organized our supplies. The silence bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I'd expected the woods to be alive with sound. Birds, insects, small animals. But there was nothing. Just that heavy, oppressive quiet that made the back of my neck prickle. "Is it always this quiet out here?" I asked as we sat around the small fire Tyler had built. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, turning his familiar features strange and ghostly. "No," he admitted, poking at the fire with a stick. "Usually there's more wildlife. Maybe it's just the season." But I could tell from the way his eyes kept darting to the darkness beyond our little circle of light that he was unsettled too. That first night, I dreamt of eyes watching me from between the trees, dozens of them, glowing faintly in the darkness. I woke, gasping for breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. Tyler slept soundly beside me, unaware of my silent panic. Outside, the wind had picked up, whistling through the pines with an almost human quality, like distant voices calling to each other. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, my city-bred nervousness about being so far from civilization. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something in these woods was aware of us, watching us, waiting. The next morning dawned gray and misty. Tyler was already up when I crawled out of the tent, sitting by the smoldering remains of our fire with a strange expression on his face. "Sleep, okay?" I asked, stretching. He didn't answer immediately, and when he did, his voice was oddly flat. "I need to show you something." He led me about 50 yards from our campsite to a small clearing. In the center, arranged in a perfect circle, were dozens of small animal bones: squirrels, rabbits, birds, bleached white by sun and time. Some had been broken, the marrow scooped out. Others were arranged in strange, intricate patterns that made my eyes hurt to look at them for too long. "What the hell is this?" I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. Tyler shook his head. "It wasn't here yesterday when we set up camp. I walked this whole area to check for level ground." "Maybe some animal," I started, but we both knew no animal would create something so deliberate, so unsettlingly precise. "We should pack up," Tyler said, already turning back toward camp. "There's another campsite about 4 miles up the trail." But when we returned to our tent, we found our packs had been emptied, their contents scattered across the clearing. My stomach dropped as I realized my phone was missing, and Tyler's too, along with our GPS device, compass, and map. "This isn't happening," I muttered, panic rising in my throat. "This isn't fucking happening." Tyler was methodically checking through the scattered gear. "The water purifier is gone," he said grimly, "and most of our food." "Who would do this?" I demanded, my voice rising hysterically. "We're miles from anywhere." "I don't know," Tyler admitted, his face pale beneath his tan. "But we need to get out of here." We quickly salvaged what we could: a few protein bars, 1 water bottle, a first aid kit, and our sleeping bags. Tyler seemed confident he could navigate us back to the car without the map, following the trail we'd come in on. But as we hurriedly packed, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, a pressure at the base of my skull, an itch between my shoulder blades. The forest seemed different as we retraced our steps. Darker, older somehow, the trees pressing closer, their branches reaching like arthritic fingers. The trail that had been so clear yesterday was now overgrown in places, forcing us to push through dense underbrush. "This isn't right," Tyler muttered after we'd been walking for what felt like hours. "We should have reached that rock formation by now." I checked my watch. 3 hours of hiking, and the forest looked no different. The same ancient pines, the same moss-covered rocks, the same oppressive silence. We should have covered at least half the distance back to the car. "Maybe we took a wrong turn," I suggested, though I'd been right behind Tyler the whole time, and I hadn't seen any forks in the path. "There are no wrong turns," he snapped, frustration evident in his voice. "There's just the trail." But when we rounded the next bend, we both stopped short. Ahead of us, in a small clearing, was our tent, our campsite, right where we'd left it. "That's not possible," I whispered. "We've been walking away from camp for hours." Tyler's face had gone ashen. "Something's wrong. This can't be happening." He strode forward, inspecting the campsite. It was ours, unmistakably. The same blue tent, the same arrangement of rocks around the fire pit. But our scattered supplies had been neatly arranged in front of the tent. And on top of our sleeping bags lay a crudely fashioned doll made of twigs and pine needles, bound together with what looked disturbingly like human hair. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Tyler." He snatched up the doll, his hands shaking with rage, and hurled it into the trees. "Someone's fucking with us," he snarled. "This is someone's sick idea of a joke." "But how?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How did we walk in a circle? How did they put our stuff back?" Tyler had no answer. He just stood there, breathing hard, his eyes wild as they scanned the surrounding trees. I'd never seen him like this. Scared, yes, but also angry, a vein pulsing in his temple. "We need to try again," he said finally. "Different direction this time. Due south. The road eventually cuts east-west below us." We set off again, Tyler leading the way with grim determination. This time, he used his pocket knife to mark trees as we passed, carving small notches in the bark. It was a small comfort, a tangible sign that we weren't completely lost in this endless sea of trees. The day wore on, the light dimming as clouds thickened overhead. A light rain began to fall, cold droplets that slipped beneath my collar and chilled my skin. Neither of us spoke much, saving our energy for the hike. But with each passing hour, I felt hope slipping away. The forest had swallowed us, and it wasn't letting go. "We need to stop," I said finally, my legs trembling with exhaustion. "It's getting dark. We can't navigate at night." Tyler looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment he nodded. "We'll make camp here. Start again at first light." We had no tent, just our sleeping bags, laid out under the dubious shelter of a large pine. Tyler managed to start a small fire despite the dampness, and we huddled close to it, sharing one of our few remaining protein bars. "What if we can't find our way out?" I asked quietly, voicing the fear that had been growing all day. Tyler's jaw tightened. "We will. The forest isn't that big. Eventually we'll hit a road or a trail or a ranger station." But his confidence sounded forced, and I could see the doubt in his eyes. Whatever was happening here defied logical explanation. The forest was playing by its own rules. That night, I dreamt of an old woman with skin like bark and fingers long and gnarled as tree roots. She stood over me, whispering in a language I didn't understand, her breath smelling of decay and pine sap. When I screamed, Tyler shook me awake. "You were having a nightmare," he said, his face ghostly in the dying firelight. But as I sat up, gasping for breath, I realized the whispers hadn't stopped with my dream. They were all around us. Soft, sibilant voices just at the edge of hearing, coming from the darkness between the trees. Tyler heard them too. I could tell from the way his body had gone rigid, his eyes wide and alert. "It's just the wind," he said, but we both knew it wasn't. The air was still, heavy with moisture. We sat in silence, listening to those whispers rise and fall like a tide, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away. Words I almost recognized, in a cadence that was almost human, but not quite. The voices continued until dawn finally broke, gray and cheerless through the trees. We packed up in silence, neither of us mentioning what we'd heard in the night. There was a new tension between us, a rift opening. I could see Tyler withdrawing into himself, his face set in hard lines I didn't recognize. "This way," he said shortly, pointing west. "We'll try heading directly toward where the sun sets." But as we walked, I noticed Tyler checking the marks he'd made on trees the day before, and I knew what he was thinking before he said it. "These aren't my marks." I looked at the notch in the pine bark, 3 parallel lines, 2 straight, too even to be made by a pocket knife. "What do you mean? You've been marking the trees as we go." "Not like this," he said, running his fingers over the marks. "Mine were just single notches. These are different." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "So someone is following us, marking the trees." "Or something," Tyler muttered, so low I almost didn't hear it. We pushed on, the day growing darker instead of lighter as storm clouds gathered overhead. The rain returned, heavier now, plastering my hair to my skull and soaking through my supposedly waterproof jacket. I was cold, hungry, and increasingly terrified. And then Tyler stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into him. "Do you smell that?" he asked, his voice tight. I sniffed the air and immediately wished I hadn't. The stench was unmistakable. Rot, decay, the sickly sweet odor of putrefaction, like something had died nearby, and not recently. "Maybe it's an animal," I suggested weakly, but Tyler was already moving toward the smell, pushing through a tangle of underbrush. I followed reluctantly, my every instinct screaming at me to run in the opposite direction. We emerged into another small clearing, and I had to clap my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. In the center of the clearing stood a crude altar made of stacked stones. Atop it lay the carcass of a deer, partly decomposed, its belly split open and emptied. Around the altar, more of those bone arrangements, more intricate than the ones we'd seen before, forming patterns that seemed to shift and move when viewed from the corner of my eye. But what made my blood freeze was the collection of items arranged carefully at the base of the altar. A tattered backpack, a broken compass, a water bottle just like mine, a torn piece of clothing that might once have been a red jacket. We weren't the first to get lost in these woods. "We need to get out of here," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." We backed away slowly, afraid to turn our backs on that grisly tableau. But as we retreated into the trees, I heard it, a cracking twig, the soft rustle of movement not caused by wind or rain. We weren't alone. Tyler heard it too. His hand found mine, squeezing painfully tight, and then we were running, crashing through the underbrush with no thought for direction or stealth, just desperate to put distance between ourselves and whatever lurked near that altar. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out, finally collapsing against the trunk of a massive pine. Rain poured down around us, turning the forest floor to mud that sucked at our boots. "What the fuck is happening?" I gasped between ragged breaths. Tyler shook his head, water streaming from his hair. "I don't know, but we can't stop. We need to keep moving." But as we staggered to our feet, a sound froze us in place. A long, ululating cry that echoed through the trees. Not quite human, not quite animal. A sound of hunger, of pursuit. And it was answered by another cry from a different direction. And then another. They were all around us. We ran again, blind panic driving us forward. The light was fading fast now, the storm turning afternoon to premature night. Every shadow seemed to move, every tree concealing some lurking threat. The cries continued, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always present, always hunting. Night fell completely, and with it came a darkness so profound I could barely see my hand in front of my face. Tyler had a small flashlight, its beam pathetically inadequate against the vast blackness of the forest. We stumbled on, clinging to each other, both of us knowing that to stop was to die, and then the flashlight caught something ahead, a structure, man-made, jutting from the forest floor. As we drew closer, I realized it was a cabin, small and weathered, its windows dark and empty as eye sockets. "Should we?" I whispered, eyeing the cabin warily. Another of those inhuman cries sounded behind us, closer now, and Tyler made the decision for both of us. We don't have a choice. The cabin door creaked open at Tyler's touch, revealing a single room thick with dust and cobwebs. The air inside was stale, with an underlying scent of something burnt and acrid. By the weak beam of the flashlight, I could make out a small table, a wood stove, a narrow bed frame with a rotted mattress. "Block the door," Tyler instructed, already dragging the table across the warped floorboards. I helped him, then sank down against the wall, exhaustion making my limbs leaden. Outside, the cries had stopped, replaced by that eerie silence that had marked our arrival in these woods. "What are they?" I whispered as Tyler sat beside me, our shoulders touching. "I don't know," he admitted, "but they know these woods better than we do. They've been hurting us, leading us in circles." "But why?" Tyler didn't answer, but I saw his gaze drift to the altar we'd found, the split-open deer carcass. Some questions have answers you don't want to hear. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the rain drumming on the cabin roof, occasionally broken by distant thunder. Despite my fear, exhaustion began to claim me, my eyelids growing heavy. "I'll take first watch," Tyler said, noticing my drooping head. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you in a few hours." I must have drifted off almost immediately because the next thing I knew, Tyler was shaking me awake, his expression urgent. "Emily, wake up," he hissed. "Listen." I sat up, blinking away sleep, and heard what had alarmed him. Scratching, soft but persistent, at the cabin walls, like dozens of tiny claws or fingernails moving across the wood. "What is that?" I breathed, pressing closer to Tyler. Before he could answer, the scratching stopped. In its place came a voice, soft, sing-song, almost childlike, speaking from just outside the cabin wall. "Tyler," it called, in a perfect imitation of my voice. "Tyler, come outside. I found the way out." I felt the blood drain from my face. Tyler's arm tightened around me. "Don't make a sound," he whispered against my ear. "Tyler," the voice called again, still in my tones but with something off about it, something hollow and wrong. "Please, Tyler. I'm scared out here alone." The voice shifted then, becoming deeper, rougher. My father's voice, though he'd been dead for 3 years. "Emily, honey, come out now. Don't make me come in there." Tears sprang to my eyes. How could it know? How could it possibly know what my father sounded like? The voices continued through the night, cycling through people we knew. My mother, Tyler's brother, our friends from back home. Each voice perfect in its mimicry, each one calling us to open the door, to step outside. And between the voices, that scratching, sometimes gentle, sometimes frenzied, as if whatever waited outside was growing impatient. Dawn seemed to take an eternity to arrive. When it finally did, pale light filtering through the cabin's grimy windows, the voices and scratching had stopped. We sat in silence, listening intently, but the forest was quiet once more. "We need to move," Tyler said finally. "They seem to hunt mainly at night. If we keep moving during the day, maybe we can find our way out before nightfall." It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. We cautiously opened the cabin door, half expecting to find something waiting, but there was only the wet, silent forest. As we stepped outside, I noticed something that made my heart stutter. Marks on the cabin walls, hundreds of them, gouged deep into the wood. Not random scratches, but symbols, crude but deliberate, arranged in spiraling patterns that drew the eye in dizzying circles. Tyler saw them too, his face hardening. "Don't look at them," he said, pulling me away. "We need to go." We set off once more, the forest somber and dripping after the night's rain. I tried to focus on placing one foot in front of the other, ignoring the growing emptiness in my stomach, the dryness of my mouth. We'd finished our last protein bar during the night, and our single water bottle was nearly empty. But worse than the hunger and thirst was the growing certainty that we were being watched, followed. Every time I glanced back, I expected to see something moving between the trees, just at the edge of vision. Sometimes I thought I did. A flicker of movement, a shadow where no shadow should be. Around midday, we stumbled upon a stream, its water clear and cold. Tyler used our bottle to scoop up water, both of us too desperate to worry about parasites or bacteria. We should follow it, Tyler decided. Water always leads to civilization eventually. It seemed as good a plan as any. The stream provided a clear path through the otherwise impenetrable forest, and the rushing water masked the sounds of our passage, and perhaps the sounds of whatever might be following us. As we picked our way along the rocky bank, I noticed Tyler's increasing agitation. He kept looking over his shoulder, his hand straying to the pocket where he kept his knife. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Nothing," he said too quickly. Then, after a moment, "Do you ever feel like something's walking right behind you? So close you should feel its breath on your neck?" I shivered because yes, I'd been feeling exactly that. A presence, always just behind me, just out of sight. "It's just nerves," I said, not believing it for a second. "We're exhausted and scared." Tyler nodded, but I could see he wasn't convinced either. We pushed on, the stream gradually widening, the forest pressing close on either side. The day wore on. the light once again beginning to fade. We'd been walking for hours with no sign of civilization, no hint that we were any closer to escape than we had been yesterday. And then the stream turned sharply and we found ourselves facing a small pond, its surface black and still as glass. On the far shore stood a figure. We both froze, my heart leaping into my throat. After days of feeling watched, of hearing inhuman cries in the night, here at last was tangible proof that we weren't alone. The figure was tall and thin, unnaturally so, like a tree that had grown wrong. It stood perfectly still, facing us across the water. I couldn't make out any details at this distance, just a silhouette, darker than the surrounding forest. "Hello?" Tyler called, his voice cracking slightly. "We're lost. Can you help us?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there, watching. "Maybe it's a hiker," I whispered, though I knew no hiker would stand so still, would fail to respond to a call for help. "We should go around the pond," Tyler decided. "Keep our distance." We began to skirt the edge of the pond, moving slowly, keeping our eyes on the motionless figure. But as we moved, so did it, keeping pace with us on the opposite shore, always directly across from us, always watching. "It's hurting us again," Tyler muttered, and I knew he was right. We were being guided, manipulated by forces we didn't understand. Darkness was falling fast now, another storm rolling in, bringing with it that preternatural blackness. The figure across the pond was becoming harder to see, blending with the shadows of the trees. And then it was gone. One moment it was there, the next, nothing. "Where did it go?" I whispered, scanning the tree line frantically. Tyler didn't answer, his face a mask of concentration as he surveyed our surroundings. "We need to find shelter. Now." We abandoned the pond, pushing back into the forest, searching desperately for anywhere we could barricade ourselves against the coming night. My legs were leaden, my mind foggy with hunger and fear. Every shadow seemed to move, every tree trunk potentially concealing that impossibly tall, thin figure. And then, miraculously, we found a path, narrow, overgrown, but undeniably man-made. We followed it, hope rekindling despite everything. The path wound through the trees, gradually sloping upward, and as we crested a small rise, we saw it. A fire tower, its metal framework rising above the tree line like a beacon. "Oh, thank God," I breathed, tears of relief springing to my eyes. "We can call for help." We stumbled toward the tower, our exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The structure was old but solid, a metal staircase spiraling up to a small cabin at the top, perhaps 60 feet off the ground. Tyler went first, the metal steps ringing beneath his boots. I followed, trying not to look down as we climbed higher, the wind whipping around us. The cabin at the top was locked, but Tyler managed to force the door open with a few well-placed kicks. Inside was a single room, dusty and abandoned but gloriously, undeniably human. A desk, a chair, an old radio setup that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Windows on all four sides offered a commanding view of the surrounding forest, miles and miles of unbroken wilderness stretching to the horizon. "No wonder we couldn't find our way out," Tyler said, staring out at the seemingly endless expanse of trees. "We're in the middle of nowhere." I was frantically checking the radio, hoping against hope that it still worked, that we could call for rescue. But it was dead, the equipment ancient and corroded. "Damn it," I muttered, slumping into the chair. "Now what?" Tyler was still at the window, his expression oddly intent. "Emily, come look at this." I joined him, following his gaze out into the gathering darkness. At first, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. And then, at the edge of the clearing around the tower, I spotted them. Figures, perhaps a dozen, standing motionless among the trees. Tall, thin figures, like the one we'd seen at the pond. "They're watching us," Tyler whispered. "They've been watching us all along." As night fell completely, more appeared, emerging from the forest to form a ring around the tower. And with full darkness came those sounds again. those not-quite-human cries, rising and falling in patterns that made my skin crawl. "They can't climb the tower," Tyler said, more to reassure himself than me, I think. "We're safe up here for the night." But as we watched, one of the figures moved forward, entering the clearing. In the darkness, it was just a silhouette, impossibly tall and thin. It approached the base of the tower, and then, with a movement that seemed to defy anatomy, it began to climb. Not using the stairs, but the exterior framework of the tower, its limbs bending in ways that human limbs shouldn't bend. "Oh God," I breathed, backing away from the window. "Tyler." He had already grabbed the chair, jamming it under the door handle. "Get away from the windows," he ordered. We huddled in the center of the small room, listening to the metallic clangs as something climbed the tower. The sounds grew closer, then stopped directly outside the cabin door. For a long moment, there was silence. Then the scratching began. That same soft, persistent scratching we'd heard at the cabin in the woods, like dozens of fingernails dragging across the metal door. And the voices started again, cycling through everyone we knew, calling to us, begging us to open the door. My father, Tyler's mother, friends from back home. Each voice perfect, each one hiding something terrible behind its familiar tones. We sat through the night, clinging to each other as those voices called to us as the scratching continued, sometimes gentle, sometimes frenzied. Occasionally, a shadow would pass across one of the windows, something tall and thin, peering in at us. By dawn, the voices had stopped. The scratching ceased. When we finally dared to look out the windows, the clearing around the tower was empty. Whatever had surrounded us during the night had retreated with the coming of day. "We need to get down while it's light," Tyler said, his voice hoarse. "Find water. Try to figure out which direction will lead us out of here." I nodded, too exhausted to argue, though the thought of descending to where those things had been made my skin crawl. We cautiously opened the door, half expecting to find something waiting on the narrow platform outside, but there was nothing. The climb down was tense, both of us constantly scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. But the forest was quiet, seemingly empty in the pale morning light. At the base of the tower, Tyler stopped suddenly, kneeling to examine something on the ground. "Look at this," he said, his voice tight. I looked where he was pointing and felt my blood turn to ice. There, in the soft earth around the tower, were footprints, hundreds of them, circling the structure. But they weren't human footprints. They were too long, too narrow, with too many toes. 7 on each foot, splayed wide like roots seeking purchase. "What made these?" I whispered, though I didn't really want to know. Tyler shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know, but they're everywhere. They've been all around us, all night." We found a small spring not far from the tower and refilled our water bottle. Tyler insisted we try to find high ground, reasoning that we might be able to spot a road or town from a vantage point. So we began to climb, following what might have once been a game trail up the steep slope of a ridge. The going was slow, the terrain rough and unforgiving. My hands were soon scraped raw from hauling myself up over boulders and fallen trees. The forest changed as we climbed higher, the massive pines giving way to smaller, twisted trees that grew at odd angles from the rocky soil. The air grew thinner, colder, mist wreathing the higher slopes. By midday, we'd reached what seemed to be the ridge's summit, a rocky outcrop that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding wilderness. And what a view it was! Miles upon miles of unbroken forest, green and vast and utterly empty of human habitation. "There," Tyler said suddenly, pointing to the southeast. "Do you see it?" I squinted, following his gesture, and saw what he'd spotted, a thin ribbon of gray cutting through the green. A road. "How far?" I asked, hope and dread mingling in my chest. Tyler considered, measuring the distance with his eyes. 10 miles, maybe 12. We could make it by tomorrow if we push hard. It seemed doable, especially with such a clear landmark to guide us. For the first time since we'd realized we were lost, I felt a flicker of genuine hope. We could make it out. We could survive this. We began our descent with renewed energy, Tyler leading the way down the ridge's far side toward that distant promise of civilization. The forest here was different. Younger, less dense, with patches of sunlight breaking through the canopy. But as the day wore on and we pushed deeper into these new woods, that sense of being watched returned. Stronger now, more immediate. Movement glimpsed from the corner of my eye. Shadows that seemed to detach themselves from trees, only to vanish when I turned to look directly, and Tyler was changing. I'd noticed it gradually since that first night. Subtle shifts in his behavior, his manner. He spoke less, and when he did, his voice had a different cadence. His movements were different too, more fluid somehow, as if his joints worked differently now. "Tyler," I said as we paused by a small stream to drink, "are you feeling okay?" He looked at me, and for a moment his face seemed wrong somehow, the angles too sharp, the skin too tight across his cheekbones. Then he blinked, and he was Tyler again, familiar and solid. "I'm fine," he said, "just tired." But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, a watchfulness, a calculation that made me shiver. We pushed on, the day fading toward evening, the shadows lengthening around us. We'd made good progress, but not enough to reach the road before dark. Another night in the forest was inevitable. "There," Tyler said, pointing to a small hollow between two massive boulders. "We can shelter there for the night." It wasn't ideal, but it offered some protection. Solid stone at our backs, a good view of the surrounding forest. Tyler gathered wood for a fire while I arranged our meager belongings, trying to create some semblance of a camp. As darkness fell, Tyler built a fire, the flames casting dancing shadows across the rock face. We huddled close to it, the night air growing colder with each passing hour. "We'll reach the road tomorrow," Tyler said, staring into the fire, "and then this will all just be a bad memory." I wanted to believe him, but something in his tone set off warning bells in my mind. He sounded too certain, as if he knew something I didn't. "Tyler," I said carefully, "how do you know there's a road there? It could be a river, or—" "It's a road," he cut me off, his voice sharp. "I saw it clearly." "Okay," I said, taken aback by his vehemence. "I just—" A sound interrupted me, one of those eerie, ululating cries we'd heard before, but closer now, much closer. It echoed through the trees, sending a chill down my spine. Tyler didn't react. He just continued staring into the fire as if he hadn't heard it. "Tyler," I said, my voice rising with fear, "did you hear that?" He looked at me then, and in the firelight his face seemed to shift just for a moment, the angles all wrong, the shadows too deep in the hollows of his eyes. "Hear what?" he asked, his voice oddly flat. The cry came again, answered by another and another. They were all around us now, drawing closer with each passing minute. And still Tyler sat there, unresponsive, unafraid. "We need to move," I said, scrambling to my feet. "They're coming. Those things from the tower, from the cabin." Tyler remained seated, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't read. "There's nothing out there, Emily. Just the wind in the trees." But I could hear them moving now, rustling underbrush, snapping twigs, drawing closer in the darkness beyond our small circle of firelight. "Tyler, please," I begged, tears springing to my eyes. "Something's wrong. We need to go." He rose then, slowly, deliberately, and as he stood to his full height, he seemed taller somehow, thinner, his proportions subtly wrong in the flickering light. "My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota, just last fall. The crisp autumn air bit at my exposed skin as I adjusted my backpack straps. My girlfriend, Rachel Rogers, was a few paces ahead on the narrow trail, her auburn hair catching the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy of ancient pines. The Boundary Waters had been Rachel's idea, a way to disconnect, to heal. We both needed it after what happened with her brother. Bear Island should be about 3 miles ahead, Rachel called back, consulting the wrinkled map. Though I swear we should have hit that landmark rock formation by now. I squinted at the sky, noticing how quickly the afternoon light was fading. Maybe we should set up camp early. These trails look different in the fall than what I remember. We'd met on a hiking forum 2 years ago. Rachel was an experienced outdoorswoman who'd grown up camping in the Superior National Forest with her family. I was a city boy from Minneapolis who'd only discovered the outdoors in my late 20s as a way to manage crippling anxiety. Our shared love of wilderness had brought us together, but this trip was about more than just enjoying nature. "You're right," Rachel conceded, dropping her pack beside a small clearing about 50 feet from the main trail. "This spot looks good." We worked in familiar harmony, setting up our 2-person tent, arranging our sleeping bags, and gathering firewood from the surrounding area. By the time darkness enveloped the forest, we had a modest fire crackling and were heating dehydrated beef stew over our portable camp stove. "Do you think we'll see any wildlife?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady and casual. Rachel stirred the pot slowly. "Probably. Moose, definitely. Maybe wolves, though they usually keep their distance. And bears?" I felt the familiar constriction in my chest that preceded my panic attacks. Northern Minnesota was black bear territory. I'd researched extensively before our trip, but my anyctophobia, fear of darkness, combined with animal anxiety was a potent mixture. "Mike," Rachel reached across and squeezed my hand. "We've got the bear canister for our food. We're making noise. We're fine." Her touch steadied me. Rachel always knew when my anxiety was mounting. Her calm confidence was one of the reasons I'd fallen for her so hard and so fast. "How are you doing?" I asked carefully. "With everything, you know." Rachel's expression darkened. 6 months ago, her younger brother Thomas had disappeared during a solo hike in these very woods. 3 weeks of frantic searching by authorities had turned up nothing but his abandoned campsite and a single boot by the shore of Gabimichigami Lake. The official report listed him as presumed drowned, but without a body, Rachel couldn't accept it. She'd been having nightmares ever since. "I'm okay," she said, but the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her. "Being here. It's hard, but necessary. I need to feel close to him again." After dinner, we secured our food in the bear canister and suspended it from a tree branch about 200 feet from our campsite. As we walked back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I swept my flashlight across the darkness between the trees, its beam barely penetrating the thick undergrowth. "Did you hear that?" I stopped suddenly. Rachel paused. "Hear what?" I thought I heard whistling. We stood in silence, listening. The forest was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, distant owl calls, the soft gurgle of a stream somewhere to our east. But no whistling. "Just the wind," Rachel said, but she took my hand as we walked back to the tent. That night, I dreamed of walking alone through an endless forest. The trees grew denser with each step, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers. Somewhere ahead, I could hear Thomas calling for help, but every time I moved toward his voice, it shifted direction. Then, from behind me, came a soft, rhythmic whistling. I turned to see a figure standing between the trees, too tall, too thin to be human, staring at me with gleaming eyes. I woke with a start, sweat-soaked and gasping. The tent was pitch black. I fumbled for my flashlight, clicking it on with shaking hands. Rachel's sleeping bag was empty. "Rachel," I whispered. No response. Panic surged through me as I unzipped the tent. The campfire had died to embers, casting just enough light to show our clearing was empty. "Rachel," I called, louder this time. The forest seemed to absorb my voice. I pulled on my boots and jacket, trying to control my breathing as I swept the flashlight around the campsite. Rachel's hiking boots were still neatly placed outside the tent. Her headlamp was on her pack. She wouldn't have gone anywhere without those, especially not in the middle of the night. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond our campsite. I spun toward the sound, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. "Is someone there?" My voice cracked. Another snap, closer this time. I backed toward the tent, my heart hammering against my ribs. Then I heard it. The soft, rhythmic whistling from my dream. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. The whistling stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, heavy and suffocating. Then, from the darkness, Rachel emerged. Relief flooded through me. "Jesus, Rachel, you scared the hell out of me. Where were you?" She walked slowly into the circle of light from my flashlight. Something was wrong. Her movements were stiff, mechanical. She was barefoot, her pajama bottoms soaked to the knees. "Rachel." I took a step toward her, then froze. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly ahead. Her lips were blue with cold, and there was a small cut on her forehead, trickling blood down the side of her face. "I heard him," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "I heard Thomas." I guided her back to the tent, wrapped her in a sleeping bag, and cleaned the cut on her forehead. She was ice cold to the touch, shivering violently. "What happened?" I asked, once she seemed more coherent. "I don't know," she whispered. "I was dreaming about Thomas. He was calling me, telling me to follow him to the water. Then I woke up standing at the edge of some pond. I don't even know how I got there." I held her until she fell back asleep, but I remained awake, sitting at the entrance of the tent, flashlight in hand, listening to the sounds of the forest. The whistling didn't return, but twice I thought I heard someone, or something, moving around our campsite just beyond the reach of my light. Morning came with merciful brightness. Rachel had no memory of her sleepwalking episode, and I decided not to press the issue. She was already dealing with enough psychological trauma without me adding to her worries. We broke camp after a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee. As I was packing up the tent, I noticed something strange. A series of symbols carved into the bark of a birch tree at the edge of our clearing. They looked freshly made, the exposed wood still pale against the white bark. "Rachel, did you see these yesterday?" I called. She came over, frowning at the markings. "No. What are they?" The symbols were crude but deliberate, a series of lines and circles that formed no pattern I recognized. But the most disturbing thing was a rough carving that looked like two stick figures. One was normal proportioned. The other was impossibly tall and thin. "Probably just some previous campers messing around," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Rachel traced the carvings with her fingertips. "These are fresh, Mike. The sap is still sticky." We exchanged a look. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge what that might mean. "Let's get moving," she said finally. "I want to reach Bear Island by noon." The morning hike was uneventful, though I couldn't shake my unease. The forest seemed different somehow, the silence between bird calls stretching longer than normal. Twice I thought I saw movement in the trees that flank the trail, but when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. Around mid-morning, we reached a fork in the trail that wasn't marked on our map. "That's weird," Rachel said, comparing the map to our GPS. "According to this, we should just keep straight. But there's definitely a trail branching off here." The unmarked path was narrower, less worn than the main trail, but it headed in the direction we wanted to go. After a brief discussion, we decided to follow it as it seemed to be a more direct route to Bear Island. That decision would change everything. The trail quickly became more overgrown, forcing us to push through dense underbrush in places. The trees closed in overhead, blocking much of the sunlight. Despite the cooler temperature, I was sweating profusely, drinking more water than I should have been. "Mike, look." Rachel had stopped ahead of me, pointing to something off the trail. About 30 feet away, partially hidden by a fallen log, was a backpack, weathered and dirty but unmistakably modern. Rachel was already moving toward it before I could stop her. "Wait," I called, hurrying after her. It could be anything." She ignored me, scrambling over the log and dropping to her knees beside the pack. With trembling hands, she turned it over, revealing a small name tag attached to the strap. "Oh my God," she whispered. I didn't need to see the name to know. The look on Rachel's face said everything. It was Thomas's pack. Rachel tore at the zippers, emptying the contents onto the forest floor. A water bottle, a weathered journal, energy bars turned to stone, a first aid kit, a headlamp with corroded batteries. "This doesn't make sense," she said, her voice rising with hysteria. "They searched this area. They had dogs, helicopters. How did they miss this?" I picked up the journal. The cover was warped from exposure to the elements, but the pages inside were still legible. The last entry was dated the day Thomas disappeared. "Something's following me. I keep hearing whistling in the trees. Last night I swear someone, or something, was standing outside my tent for hours, just watching. I'm heading to Bear Island today. Hopefully I'll find other hikers there. If anyone finds this and I'm not around, tell Rachel I'm sorry." I closed the journal, not wanting Rachel to see it, but she snatched it from my hands. "Mike, we have to find him," she said after reading the entry, her eyes wild with a mixture of hope and fear. "He could still be alive out here." "Rachel, it's been 6 months," I said gently. "And this pack, it's been exposed to the elements all that time. If he was still in these woods, they would have found him." "Unless something's keeping him hidden," she whispered, clutching the journal to her chest. I didn't know how to respond to that. The rational part of my brain knew that Thomas was gone, either drowned as the official report stated, or lost in the vast wilderness and long dead. But another part, the part that had heard the whistling last night and seen the fresh carvings on the tree, wasn't so sure. "We'll report this when we get back to civilization," I said finally. "But right now, we need to focus on getting to Bear Island before dark." Rachel carefully repacked Thomas's belongings and insisted on carrying his backpack along with her own. I didn't argue. She needed this tangible connection to her brother. As we continued down the trail, the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The air felt thick, almost gelatinous, filling my lungs with each labored breath. My anxiety medication was in my pack, but I resisted the urge to take it. I needed to stay alert. Around mid-afternoon, we emerged from the dense forest into a small clearing dominated by an enormous white pine. At its base was a crude shelter made of branches and pine boughs. "Someone's been living out here," I said, approaching the shelter cautiously. The interior was just large enough for a person to lie down. Inside was a nest of leaves and grass, and something else, a collection of small animal bones, arranged in a pattern similar to the symbols we'd seen carved into the tree. Rachel knelt by the shelter, touching the branch framework. "This is recent construction, a few weeks old at most." "Hunters, maybe," I suggested, though I knew it wasn't hunting season yet. "In the boundary waters, with a shelter instead of a tent?" Rachel shook her head. "No hunter would bother with this." We documented the location on our GPS and continued hiking, but the discovery had unsettled us both. Who would build such a primitive shelter in a wilderness area known for its harsh conditions? And what was the significance of those bone arrangements? As the afternoon waned, the sky darkened with approaching rain clouds. We needed to find a suitable campsite soon, but we were still at least 2 miles from Bear Island according to our map. The unmarked trail had become increasingly difficult to follow, sometimes disappearing altogether before reappearing yards away. "We should go back to the main trail," I suggested as fat raindrops began to fall through the canopy. "We can't," Rachel replied, a note of panic in her voice. "We're closer to Bear Island than to where we started. We just need to push through." The rain intensified quickly, soaking through our jackets despite the tree cover. Water streamed down my face, getting into my eyes and making it hard to see where I was placing my feet. The trail turned muddy, each step becoming treacherous. "Rachel, wait!" I called as she pushed ahead recklessly. "We need to be careful." Her scream cut through the sound of the rain. I watched in horror as she suddenly disappeared from view, the ground seemingly swallowing her whole. "Rachel!" I sprinted forward, skidding to a halt at the edge of what I now saw was a steep ravine. The rain had eroded part of the trail, creating a mudslide that had taken Rachel with it. She lay about 20 feet below, motionless on a bed of rocks and fallen branches. I scrambled down the muddy slope, sliding most of the way, my heart in my throat. "Rachel! Rachel, can you hear me?" I dropped to my knees beside her. She was conscious but dazed, blood mixing with rainwater on her face from a gash above her eyebrow. Her right leg was bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. "My leg," she groaned. "I think it's broken." The gravity of our situation hit me like a physical blow. We were miles from the main trail, in an unmarked area of the wilderness during a rainstorm, with no cell service. And now Rachel couldn't walk. I pushed down my rising panic and forced myself to think logically. First, I needed to get Rachel out of the rain and assess her injuries. I spotted a small overhang in the ravine wall about 30 yards away that would provide some shelter. "I'm going to have to move you," I told her, already unshouldering my pack. "It's going to hurt, but we need to get out of this rain." Using my rain jacket as a makeshift stretcher, I managed to drag Rachel to the overhang. She bit her lip to keep from screaming but couldn't hold back whimpers of pain with each movement. Once under shelter, I used the first aid kit to clean and bandage the cut on her forehead, then turned my attention to her leg. The break was obvious even to my untrained eye, a compound fracture of the tibia, the bone pressing against the skin, though thankfully not breaking through. I used the emergency splint from my first aid kit and 2 straight branches to immobilize it as best I could, but Rachel would need proper medical attention soon. "What are we going to do?" she asked once I'd finished, her face pale with shock and pain. I checked my watch. It was just past 4 p.m. and the rain showed no signs of letting up. Nightfall would come early under these conditions. "We'll spend the night here," I decided. "In the morning, I'll build a better shelter, then try to hike back to the main trail for help." Rachel nodded weakly, but I could see the fear in her eyes, the same fear that was threatening to overwhelm me. We were suddenly very vulnerable in a wilderness that no longer felt indifferent, but actively hostile. I used our emergency blankets to create a small tent-like structure against the ravine wall, extending our sheltered area. Inside, I laid out our sleeping bags, Rachel's underneath her for cushioning, mine over her for warmth. The rain beat a constant rhythm on the thin foil of the emergency blankets. Darkness fell swiftly and completely. I tried to keep a small fire going with what dry wood I could find under the overhang, but it sputtered and smoked more than it burned. Our headlamps cast eerie, shifting shadows across the ravine walls. Rachel drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain in her leg occasionally drawing whimpers from her lips despite the ibuprofen I'd given her. I sat beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other gripping my hunting knife, a tool I'd brought for practical purposes that now felt like a woefully inadequate weapon. The rain finally stopped around midnight, leaving behind a preternatural silence. No insects chirping, no nocturnal animals moving through the underbrush, just the occasional drip of water from saturated leaves and the sound of Rachel's labored breathing. Then, from somewhere up on the ridge came the whistling. It started soft, almost imperceptible, a simple 4-note pattern repeated with mechanical precision. As I strained to listen, it grew louder, moving parallel to the ravine, as if whoever, or whatever, was making the sound was pacing back and forth, looking for a way down. Rachel stirred, her eyes flying open. "Thomas," she whispered. "Shh." I placed a hand gently over her mouth. "Stay quiet." The whistling stopped. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a cascade of small stones clattered down the ravine slope about 50 feet from our shelter. Something was coming down. I switched off our headlamps, plunging us into darkness, and moved to the edge of our sheltered area, knife gripped tightly in my sweating hand. My night vision was poor, another aspect of my nyctophobia, but I could make out a darker shape moving against the night, tall and unnaturally thin. picking its way down the rocky slope with inhuman grace. The shape paused at the bottom of the ravine, and I felt rather than saw it turn in our direction. There was a stillness to it that no living creature should possess. Not the stillness of waiting, but the stillness of something that doesn't need to breathe, doesn't need to shift its weight, doesn't have the small involuntary movements that betray life. I held my breath, pressing back against the ravine wall, feeling Rachel's hand grip my ankle in terror. For what seemed like an eternity, the figure remained motionless. Then, slowly, it began to move again, not toward us, but along the bottom of the ravine, heading east. When I could no longer hear its movement, I released my breath in a shuddering gasp. "What was that?" Rachel whispered. I couldn't bring myself to describe what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen in the darkness. "Probably a deer," I lied. "Go back to sleep if you can. I'll keep watch." But neither of us slept that night. We sat huddled together under the emergency blankets, jumping at every sound, watching the eastern sky gradually lighten with approaching dawn. Morning revealed the full extent of our predicament. Rachel's leg was swollen dramatically, the skin around the break turning purple and yellow. She had a fever, her skin hot to the touch despite the cool morning air. Infection was setting in, and quickly. "Mike," she said, her voice strained with pain, "you need to go for help. Now." I knew she was right, but the thought of leaving her alone terrified me. What if that thing, whatever it was, came back? "I can't leave you defenseless," I said. Rachel reached into her pack and pulled out a canister of bear spray and a flare gun, items I hadn't known she was carrying. "I'm not defenseless," she said, managing a weak smile. "And you won't be gone long, right?" I nodded, though we both knew it would take me at least a day to reach help and return, even if everything went perfectly. I packed a small day bag with water, energy bars, my first aid kit, and my knife. I left Rachel with both headlamps, the flare gun, the bear spray, and as much food and water as I could spare. "If anything happens," I told her, crouching by her side, "anything at all, fire a flare. I'll come running back." She grabbed my hand. "Be careful, Mike, please." I kissed her, trying to pour all my love and reassurance into that one gesture. I'll be back with help before you know it. Climbing out of the ravine was harder than I'd anticipated. The rain had left the slopes slick with mud, and twice I lost my footing and slid several feet before catching myself on exposed roots. By the time I reached the trail above, my clothes were caked with mud, and fresh scratches stung on my hands and forearms. I had a decision to make: continue towards Bear Island in hopes of finding other hikers, or head back the way we'd come to the main trail. After a moment's consideration, I chose the latter. The unmarked path had proven treacherous, and I couldn't risk another injury. The forest seemed different in the morning light, less threatening, more navigable. I made good time, recognizing landmarks from the previous day. Around mid-morning, I reached the strange shelter we'd discovered. I was about to pass it by when something caught my eye, a flash of color that hadn't been there before. Approaching cautiously, I saw that someone had been here since yesterday. The bone arrangement inside the shelter had been disturbed, and in its place was a torn piece of red fabric. With a jolt of recognition, I realized it was from Rachel's jacket, a jacket she'd been wearing when we found this place. Cold fear trickled down my spine. How was this possible? Rachel had been with me the entire time since we'd found this shelter, and now she was immobilized in the ravine. How could a piece of her clothing be here? Unless she hadn't been with me the entire time. Unless the Rachel who emerged from the darkness last night, who walked stiffly into our campsite with blue lips and blank eyes, wasn't entirely Rachel. The thought was so disturbing I physically recoiled from it. I was letting the stress and fear get to me, creating impossible scenarios rather than focusing on the task at hand, getting help for Rachel. I continued my journey with renewed urgency, pushing my body to move faster despite the treacherous terrain. By early afternoon, I reached the fork where the unmarked trail split from the main path. Relief flooded through me as I stepped onto the wider, well-maintained trail. I was back in the part of the Boundary Waters that was regularly patrolled and frequented by other hikers. Sure enough, less than an hour later, I encountered a group of 3 backpackers heading towards Magnetic Lake. I must have looked a frightening sight, mud-covered, wild-eyed, and frantic, but they stopped immediately when I explained the situation. One of them, a retired emergency medical technician named Frank, had a satellite phone. While he called for emergency services, the other 2, a married couple named Dan and Eliza, shared their water and food with me. The nearest ranger station can dispatch a rescue team, Frank explained after making the call, but it will take them a few hours to reach your girlfriend's location. We should head back there now and wait for them. I could have wept with gratitude. The 3 strangers gathered essential supplies and accompanied me back toward the unmarked trail. Frank continued trying to reach the ranger station as we walked, providing updates on our location. It was late afternoon by the time we approached the fork in the trail. The sun was already lowering, casting long shadows through the trees. As we turned onto the unmarked path, a red streak suddenly shot into the sky from the direction of the ravine. A flare. Rachel was in trouble. I broke into a run, the others following close behind. My exhausted legs protested, but adrenaline pushed me forward. The flare meant Rachel was conscious and able to use the flare gun, which was good, but it also meant she felt threatened enough to signal for help. We were about a mile from the ravine when the second flare went up. This one seemed to falter, its trajectory wobbly, as if the person firing it was struggling. "Hurry!" I gasped, pushing myself faster. As we neared the area where Rachel had fallen, I could hear something. Not whistling this time, but a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to vibrate through the trees themselves. The sound made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. Frank grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. "Wait," he said, his voice tense. "Something's not right." He was staring at the ground ahead of us. In the fading light, I could just make out what had caught his attention. A series of footprints in the mud, leading toward the ravine. But these weren't human footprints, at least not entirely. They started as normal boot prints, then gradually elongated, the toe marks stretching forward unnaturally, the heel impressions deepening as if the walker's weight had shifted. The humming grew louder, pulsing through my skull with nauseating intensity. "Rachel!" I shouted, pulling free from Frank's grasp and charging forward. I reached the edge of the ravine and looked down. Our makeshift shelter was in shambles, the emergency blankets torn and scattered. Rachel was gone. No, not gone. Moving. About 100 yards down the ravine, a figure was dragging itself along the rocky ground. Even in the dim light, I recognized Rachel's clothing, her auburn hair. Rachel! I scrambled down the slope, half running, half sliding toward her. She stopped moving and slowly turned toward my voice. Even from a distance, I could see something was terribly wrong. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated. When she lifted her head to look at me, her neck bent at an impossible angle. I slowed my approach, a primal warning flaring in my brain. "Rachel?" She opened her mouth, but what came out wasn't Rachel's voice. It wasn't a human voice at all, but a high-pitched keening that harmonized with the humming that still permeated the air. From behind Rachel, something else rose up. A towering, emaciated figure with limbs too long and too jointed, its skin the pale gray of birch bark, its face a blank oval devoid of features except for a gash-like mouth. It placed what might have been a hand on Rachel's shoulder, its fingers wrapping completely around her upper arm. I was frozen in place, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It was a hallucination brought on by stress, lack of sleep, and fear. A shout from behind me broke the paralysis. Frank and the others had reached the ravine edge and were taking in the nightmarish scene below. "Mike, get back!" Frank yelled, his voice steady despite the terror that must have been coursing through him. The creature's head snapped up at the new voices, the featureless face somehow focusing on the ridge above. It straightened to its full height, at least 8 feet tall, and opened its mouth impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Then it began to whistle. It was the same four-note pattern I'd heard the night before, but now it carried a physical force that drove me to my knees. My ears felt like they were bleeding, though when I touched them, my fingers came away clean. Through the pain, I saw Rachel being pulled to her feet by the creature, her broken leg dragging uselessly. Her eyes were open but vacant, her face slack. Whatever connection she still had to her body was tenuous at best. "No!" I screamed, lunging forward. The creature's head whipped toward me, the whistling cutting off abruptly. For a moment, we stared at each other, me, trembling with terror and rage, it, utterly still except for a slight tilt of its head, as if curious about my defiance. Then, with unnatural speed, it twisted and scrambled up the ravine wall, not toward me, but toward Frank and the others. Rachel was dragged along like a rag doll, her broken leg bouncing horribly against the rocks. "Run!" I shouted to the hikers above, but it was too late. The creature crested the ridge in seconds, faster than anything human could move. Screams erupted, cut short one by one. I heard Frank's satellite phone clatter down the ravine slope, followed by a spray of blood that glistened black in the fading light. Self-preservation finally kicked in. I turned and ran down the ravine, away from the carnage above, away from whatever that thing was, away from Rachel, or what used to be Rachel. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. Collapsing beside a small stream that fed into a larger body of water, Gabi-Michigami Lake, I realized dimly, the same lake where Thomas's boot had been found. As darkness fell completely, I huddled against a large boulder, shivering uncontrollably. The sounds of the forest seemed to have returned to normal, crickets chirping, an occasional owl call, the gentle lapping of water against the shore. But I knew now that this normalcy was an illusion, a thin veneer over something ancient and malevolent that dwelled in these woods. I don't know when I fell asleep, but I dreamed of Rachel and Thomas walking hand in hand into the depths of Gabi-Michigami Lake, their movements stiff and puppet-like, while a tall figure stood on the shore, whistling its four-note song. I woke at dawn to the sound of voices and dogs barking. The search and rescue team had arrived, drawn by the emergency signal from Frank's satellite phone. I was found huddled by the lake, dehydrated and hypothermic, babbling about whistling and creatures in the woods. They never found Rachel or the three hikers. The official report listed them as missing, presumed drowned in Gabi-Michigami Lake after an accident in the ravine. Exposure and trauma explained my delusions, according to the park rangers and the psychologist they had me speak with afterward. But I know what I saw. I know what walks in the boundary waters when darkness falls, and I know why hikers sometimes go missing without a trace, leaving behind only scattered possessions and unanswered questions. I live in Duluth now, as far from the boundary waters as I can get while still being able to watch the forests. Because sometimes, on very still nights, I hear whistling, a simple four-note pattern that makes my blood run cold and my scars ache. And I know it's getting closer. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota just last summer. I still wake up screaming most nights. The trip was supposed to be a chance to clear my head after my divorce. 6 months of legal battles, splitting assets, and watching 10 years of marriage dissolve had left me hollow. My therapist suggested grounding activities to help process the grief. As a kid, I'd gone camping with my dad in the Boundary Waters, and those memories remained untainted by adult complications. So I requested time off from my job as a software developer, packed my gear, and headed north. I'd chosen late September deliberately. Tourist season was winding down, and I wanted solitude. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the landscape in brilliant reds and golds that reminded me there was still beauty in the world. My plan was simple: a 7-day solo trek through the wilderness, moving between campsites along the network of lakes and portage trails that crisscross the region. The ranger at the entry point near Ely seemed surprised to see someone heading out alone so late in the season. "Weather can turn quick this time of year," she warned, checking my permit. "You sure you don't want to wait for a buddy?" "I'll be fine," I assured her, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. "I've got satellite communication if there's an emergency." She nodded, unconvinced. "Just stay on your permitted route. There've been some strange reports from the Echo Lake area. Probably just teenagers messing around, but still." "Strange how?" I asked. "Just noises. Voices where there shouldn't be any. Couple campers said they felt like they were being watched." She shrugged. "Like I said, probably nothing." I thanked her for the warning and pushed off from shore in my rented canoe, the first strokes of the paddle feeling like freedom. The lakes were glassy, mirroring the sky in perfect symmetry. For the first time in months, the constant chatter in my brain, lawyers, custody arrangements for our dog, dividing finances, faded to background noise. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. I paddled from Moose Lake to Knife Lake, making good time and setting up camp on a small island. The physicality of portaging, carrying my canoe and pack across land between lakes, left me pleasantly exhausted. I caught walleye for dinner, built small fires that crackled companionably as I read by their light, and slept dreamlessly under star-filled skies. On the third day, I reached the portage trail to Echo Lake. The path was less maintained than the others I'd traveled, narrow and shadowed by ancient white pines that seemed to lean inward as I passed beneath them. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, as if the forest was holding its breath. "Just your imagination," I muttered, adjusting the canoe on my shoulders. The divorce had left me prone to dark thoughts. My ex used to tease me about having an overactive imagination. "You see monsters where there's just shadows," she'd say. The portage was longer than indicated on my map, nearly a mile of increasingly difficult terrain. By the time I reached Echo Lake, sweat soaked my shirt despite the cool air, and the light was beginning to fade. I should have made camp at the last site, but something pushed me forward. A need to prove I could still make good decisions on my own, perhaps. Echo Lake was smaller than the others I'd traversed, maybe a mile across at its widest point, ringed by steep rocky cliffs on the northern shore. The water was unusually still, with none of the small waves that had danced across the other lakes. Even the constant whisper of wind through pine needles seemed muffled here. I found a campsite on the eastern shore and quickly set up my tent, gathering firewood as the light dimmed. The sight felt wrong somehow. Not overtly, but in subtle ways that triggered instinctive warnings. The fire pit showed signs of recent use, but not the usual kind. The stones were arranged in an odd pattern, not the typical ring, but something more deliberate, almost like symbols. I rearranged them into a normal circle, telling myself I was being paranoid. That night, I heard the echoes for the first time. I was half asleep when they started, voices carrying across the water. At first, I thought other campers had arrived, though I hadn't seen anyone else all day. I unzipped my tent and peered out. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see the lake's surface, smooth as glass except for expanding ripples from something. The voices came again, clearer now. They sounded like children playing, laughing, but the words were indistinct, almost garbled, as if played at the wrong speed. Then, for just a moment, I heard my name. Not shouted, but spoken conversationally, as if someone stood right beside me. "James," the voice said, in a perfect imitation of my ex-wife's tone when she wanted my attention. "James, come here." I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, but there was only my empty tent and the night beyond. When I looked back at the lake, the ripples were gone. Sleep eluded me after that. I lay awake listening, but the voices didn't return. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was just the wind playing tricks, or maybe loons calling. Echo Lake got its name for a reason, after all. The fourth day dawned gray and cool, with low clouds promising rain. I should have packed up and moved on, followed my permit route to the next lake. But something about Echo Lake compelled me to stay. I told myself I needed a rest day. The portaging had been harder than expected. In truth, it was the voices. I needed to know if they'd return. I spent the day exploring the shoreline in my canoe, trolling for fish I didn't catch, and gathering more firewood than I needed. The lake had an unusual number of deadfalls along its shore, trees that had toppled into the water, their exposed roots creating grotesque sculptures that resembled grasping hands. Under one such root system, I found a small cave-like hollow. Inside was a collection of objects that stopped my breath. A child's shoe, ancient and rotted, several yellowed animal bones arranged in a circle, and a small wooden doll, crude but unmistakably human-shaped, its face worn smooth except for two deep gouges where eyes should be. I backed away, telling myself it was just junk washed up by spring floods or left by previous campers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the items had been arranged deliberately, like an offering or a warning. That evening, the rain began, a light, steady drizzle that dampened my attempts to build a fire. I retreated to my tent earlier than usual with my camp stove and a dehydrated meal. The rain intensified as darkness fell, drumming against the tent fly in a rhythm that almost, but not quite, masked the returning voices. They started as whispers this time, barely audible beneath the rain, then grew louder, more insistent. Still childlike, but with an edge that raised the hair on my arms. I couldn't make out words, just a sing-song quality that felt mockingly familiar, like a schoolyard taunt just beyond comprehension. "Hello," I called out, immediately feeling foolish. "Is someone there?" The voices stopped abruptly. For 10 heartbeats, there was only the sound of rain. Then, from directly outside my tent, close enough that I should have seen a shadow against the fabric, came a response. "We're here, James. We've always been here." The voice was young but wrong somehow, like an adult trying to sound like a child, or multiple voices speaking in perfect unison. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands shaking so badly I dropped it twice before getting a grip. When I finally aimed the beam through the tent mesh, there was nothing outside but rain and darkness. Sleep was impossible. I sat with my back to the center tent pole, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, until dawn lightened the sky. The rain stopped sometime in the early morning hours, and with it, the voices. By first light, I had convinced myself I was experiencing some kind of stress reaction, auditory hallucinations brought on by divorce, trauma, and isolation. The rational explanation helped calm my frayed nerves. I decided to leave Echo Lake and continue my journey, get back on schedule. I packed quickly, eager to be gone before the voices could return. As I was collapsing my tent, something caught my eye at the lake's edge. Footprints in the mud, small, like a child's, leading from the water to my campsite. They stopped just outside where my tent had been. I told myself they were raccoon tracks distorted by rain, or my own footprints from the day before, but even as I formulated these explanations, I knew they were lies. The prints were fresh, the impressions sharp in the soft mud, and they only went one way, from the lake to my tent. There were no return tracks. My hands moved faster, stuffing gear haphazardly into my pack. I needed to be on the water, away from this place. As I dragged my canoe to the shore, movement on the far side of the lake caught my attention. A figure stood at the edge of the tree line. Small, possibly a child, though it was hard to be certain at that distance. It remained perfectly still, watching me. I raised my hand in greeting, relief flooding through me at the presence of another human. The figure didn't respond. Then, as I watched, it took a step backward and seemed to melt into the trees. There, one moment, gone the next. Unease replaced relief. There was something wrong about the figure. Its stillness, the way it moved. I pushed off from shore, paddling hard toward the portage trail that would take me to the next lake. My planned route would keep me on Echo Lake longer, following its shoreline north before cutting west, but I couldn't bear to stay on these waters another hour. The portage trail I chose wasn't on my map. It was narrower than the others, barely visible in places, but it led away from Echo Lake, and that was all that mattered. The ground was soft from the rain, making the trek with canoe and pack even more difficult. Twice I lost the trail completely and had to backtrack. The forest seemed denser here, the trees growing closer together, their branches forming a canopy that blocked most of the daylight. After what seemed like hours, I emerged at another lake, smaller than Echo, with steep, rocky shores that offered few landing spots. According to my map, this had to be Whispering Lake, though it wasn't on my permitted route. I'd have to portage again to rejoin my original path, but that was a problem for tomorrow. For now, I just needed to find a campsite before darkness fell. I paddled along the shoreline, searching for a suitable spot. The options were limited. The forest grew almost to the water's edge in most places. Finally, I found a small clearing on the eastern shore with just enough flat ground for my tent. It wasn't an official site, but I was beyond caring about regulations. As I unloaded my gear, exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. I'd been running on adrenaline and fear all day, and my body was demanding rest. I managed to set up my tent and secure my food bag before collapsing onto my sleeping pad, still fully clothed. I dreamed of children playing in dark water, their faces pale blurs beneath the surface. They called my name, voices bubbling through the liquid between us. In the dream, I knew I should be afraid, but instead felt a strange longing to join them, to sink beneath the water and finally rest. A hand reached up, small fingers stretching toward mine. I woke, gasping, shirt soaked with sweat despite the cool air. Night had fallen completely, and for a moment I was disoriented. Then I registered what had awakened me. Voices, not from my dream, but from outside my tent. The same childlike chorus I'd heard at Echo Lake, but closer now, more distinct. "He's awake," they said, and giggled, a sound like water rushing over stones. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. "This isn't funny." "It's not meant to be funny, James," came the reply in that same unison that wasn't quite human. "It's meant to be forever." Something scraped against my tent, a soft, sliding touch that traced the outline of my body through the fabric. I scrambled away, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "Company," they answered simply. "It's lonely here." The zipper of my tent began to move, sliding upward inch by inch, though no hand was visible pulling it. I lunged forward, grabbing the zipper tab and yanking it back down. Outside, the voices laughed again. "You can't keep us out, James. We're already inside you." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air swept through me. Because they were right. I could feel it now, a presence in my mind that hadn't been there before, foreign thoughts brushing against my own, like fingers testing the texture of my consciousness. I fumbled for my headlamp and knife, desperate for light and some means of defense. When the beam cut through the darkness, I saw them. Small handprints on the tent wall, visible as shadows against the fabric. Dozens of them at different heights, pressing inward. "Stop!" I shouted, slashing wildly at the tent wall. The knife cut through the nylon with a sound like sighing. Cold air rushed in, but the handprints vanished. Outside, the voices whispered, "Not yet, not yet, but soon." I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the ruins of my tent, knife in hand, headlamp illuminating the small circle of safety around me until its batteries began to fade. By the time dawn broke, I was shivering uncontrollably, as much from fear as from the cold. In daylight, my campsite seemed benign, just a clearing in the woods beside a lake. There were no footprints in the soft earth around my tent, no evidence of visitors in the night. Only my slashed tent wall proved something had happened. I needed to get back to civilization. Abandoning any pretense of following my permitted route, I studied my map for the quickest way out. If I portaged north from Whispering Lake, I could reach a Forest Service road in about 2 days. From there, I might be able to hitch a ride back to Ely. I packed quickly, patching my tent with duct tape just enough to make it usable if I needed it again. As I worked, I felt watched, though the shoreline and forest appeared empty whenever I looked up. The feeling of presence in my mind remained, faint but persistent, like an itch I couldn't scratch. The portage north was brutal. The trail climbed steeply, crossing ridges and boulder fields that required careful navigation with my heavy pack and awkward canoe. By midday, I was soaked with sweat despite the cool temperature. Worse, I began to doubt my direction. The trail forked repeatedly with no blazes to mark the correct path. I made my choices based on instinct, but each one felt wrong somehow, as if I was being led deeper into the wilderness rather than toward escape. Late in the afternoon, I emerged at another lake, but it wasn't the one I expected. According to my map, I should have reached Long, Narrow Disappointment Lake. Instead, I found myself looking at a nearly perfect circle of water surrounded by steep cliffs, a lake that wasn't on my map at all. "No," I whispered, panic rising. "This isn't possible." But it was there, undeniably real, a hidden lake perhaps half a mile across. The water was dark, almost black, reflecting the cliffs and sky like a mirror. No wind disturbed its surface. No birds called in the surrounding forest. The silence was absolute, pressing against my ears like physical pressure. I had 2 choices: backtrack to Whispering Lake or press on across this unknown water. The thought of retracing my steps, of spending another night near where the voices had found me, decided the matter. I would cross this lake and hope to find a trail on the other side that would lead me back to my map. I pushed my canoe into the water and climbed in carefully. The lake was surprisingly deep. My paddle couldn't touch bottom even a few feet from shore. The water felt wrong against my skin. Thicker somehow, almost oily. I wiped my hands on my pants and began paddling toward the center of the lake. Halfway across, the voices returned. They rose from the water itself this time, not echoing from shore but bubbling up around my canoe as if speakers lay just beneath the surface. The same childlike chorus, but clearer now, their words perfectly intelligible. "We knew you'd come here, James. We've been waiting so long." My paddle froze mid-stroke. Directly below my canoe, far deeper than should have been visible in the dark water, lights glimmered. Small, pale orbs that might have been faces, or lanterns, or bioluminescent fish, except they were moving, rising slowly toward the surface. "What are you?" I asked, my voice barely audible even to myself. The answer came from all around me, spoken by the lake itself. "We are the forgotten, the lost, the taken." The orbs continued their ascent, resolving into distinct shapes as they neared the surface. Small, human-like forms that glowed with an internal phosphorescence. Their features were indistinct, fluid, like faces half-remembered from dreams. I dug my paddle into the water, desperate to reach shore, but the canoe barely moved. The water had thickened further, holding my craft in place like setting amber. "No one leaves Echo Trail," the voices said. "Not really. Parts of you will always remain." "This isn't Echo Lake," I argued, still fighting to move the canoe. Laughter rippled across the water. All water is connected here. All echoes find their way home. The first of the glowing forms breached the surface beside my canoe. Not a child as I'd feared, but something worse. A humanoid shape composed of twisting, translucent tissue that might once have been skin. Empty sockets where eyes should be. A mouth that opened too wide, revealing nothing but darkness within. I screamed then, a sound torn from some primal place beyond thought. My paddle swung in a desperate arc, connecting with the thing beside my canoe. It gave way like rotten fruit, collapsing into the water with a hiss of escaping gas. But where it fell, others rose. Dozens of them, surrounding my canoe, reaching with limbs that ended in too many joints. The foreign presence in my mind expanded suddenly, flooding my consciousness with images that weren't my own. Children playing by a lake, families camping, solitary hikers, and then water closing over their faces, darkness, cold, and finally transformation into what now surrounded me. "Join us," they whispered, their voices inside my head now. "Become part of the echo." My canoe tipped as multiple hands gripped its gunnels. Water sloshed over the sides, shockingly cold against my legs. In desperation, I reached for my emergency satellite communicator, only to find it missing from its pouch on my life vest. "Looking for this?" asked the voices. I looked down to see my communicator floating just below the surface, held in pale, elongated fingers that had never belonged to anything human. As I watched, they crushed it, the device imploding with a sad electronic chirp. The canoe tipped further. I was going into the water. In seconds, those things would have me, drag me down to become whatever they were. In that moment of absolute terror, something inside me broke, or perhaps awakened. I had spent 6 months being dissolved by my divorce, letting pieces of myself be stripped away until I barely recognized what remained. I was not going to dissolve here too. "No!" I shouted, and the word carried a force that surprised even me. I drove my paddle directly into the water, aiming for the nearest of the glowing forms. The impact sent a shock up my arms, but I felt something give way beneath the blade. The presence in my mind recoiled, briefly weakened. I used that moment to throw myself toward the far gunwale, deliberately capsizing the canoe away from the densest cluster of entities. As the craft flipped, I gulped a final breath before plunging into the black water. The cold hit like physical pain, driving needles into every exposed inch of skin. Worse was the sensation of the water itself, not liquid, but something semi-solid that seemed to probe my body, seeking entry through eyes, ears, mouth. I kept my face tightly closed, kicking hard toward where I thought the shore must be. Hands grabbed at me from below, tangling in my clothing, my hair. I fought wildly, my lungs already burning for air. One particularly strong grip caught my ankle, pulling me downward. I reached for my belt knife, found it, and slashed blindly below me. Something screamed, a sound that traveled through water and bone rather than air. The grip loosened. I broke the surface gasping, vision sparkling with oxygen deprivation. The shore was closer than I'd expected, perhaps 20 yards away. Behind me, the water boiled with pale forms, all converging on my position. I swam with every ounce of strength remaining, my waterlogged clothes and boots dragging like anchors. My feet found purchase on lake bottom just as the first of the entities reached me, fingers like cold wire wrapped around my wrist. I didn't look back, simply lunged forward, dragging my pursuer partially onto the shore with me. In the last light of sunset, I finally saw it clearly. The thing that had once been human, its body translucent and swollen from long immersion, face a melted mask with only the suggestion of features. Empty eye sockets stared upward, the head cocked at an impossible angle. "You cannot leave," it said, though its mouth didn't move. "No one leaves." I brought my knife down, aiming for what might have been a heart in a human. The blade sank into yielding tissue. The thing convulsed, its grip tightening painfully before suddenly releasing. It slid back into the water without a splash, leaving only a slick residue on the stones where it had lain. I scrambled up the bank expecting pursuit, but the entities remained in the water, glowing forms floating just below the surface like malevolent lily pads. Their voices, however, followed me into the forest. "We are patient, James. We have eternity, and you're already carrying us with you." I ran blindly through the gathering darkness, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. I had lost everything: canoe, most of my gear, any sense of direction. All I knew was that I needed to put distance between myself and that lake. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to stop. I collapsed beneath a large pine, shivering violently in my wet clothes. The night was turning bitterly cold, and without dry clothes or shelter, hypothermia was a real danger. I had to build a fire. My emergency fire kit was in my pants pocket, miraculously still there and somewhat dry in its waterproof case. I gathered what dry tinder I could find beneath the pine's lower branches, working by touch more than sight in the near-total darkness. The process was agonizingly slow with numb fingers, but finally, sparks caught. The small flame felt like the first real hope I'd had in days. As the fire grew, pushing back the darkness, I stripped off my wet outer layers and hung them nearby to dry. The heat was glorious, thawing my frozen extremities and bringing painful pins and needles as circulation returned. I huddled as close as I dared, ready to feed any dry material I could find into the precious flames. It was only when I had finally stopped shivering that I realized I wasn't alone. Something watched from just beyond the circle of firelight, something that breathed in small, excited gasps. I stared into the darkness, the fire's glow ruining my night vision. "Who's there?" I called, voice rasping in my dry throat. A child stepped into the light, a girl of perhaps 8 or 9, wearing a simple white dress that was somehow dry despite the damp forest floor. Her face was pale but human, with dark eyes that reflected the flames. She might have been a lost camper, except for the wrongness I sensed immediately. The too perfect stillness of her posture, the way she didn't blink, the impossible dryness of her clothing. "Hello, James," she said, her voice normal but carrying the same undertones I'd heard in the lake chorus. "You ran away from us." I scrambled backward, nearly into the fire. "What are you?" She tilted her head, bird-like. "I'm Lily. I drowned here in 1924. My family was camping, and I wandered away." She took a step closer. "But that's not what you asked. You want to know what we are." "Yes," I whispered, unable to look away from her unblinking eyes. "We're echoes," she said simply. "Memories trapped in water and earth. When people die here, especially children, sometimes they don't leave. And sometimes what lives in the deep water finds us and changes us." "What lives in the water?" I asked, though every instinct screamed not to know. Lily smiled, revealing teeth too sharp for a human child. "The hungry one. It's very old. It was here before people, before trees. It sleeps most of the time, deep in the mud. But it dreams, and its dreams become like us." She gestured to herself. "Not quite alive, not quite dead, just echoes." I swallowed hard. What does it want with me? "It's curious about you. You're different from the others who come here. There's a hole in you, a space where something was torn away." She tapped her chest, mirroring where my heart hammered against my ribs. "The hungry one finds that interesting. It wants to see what might grow there instead." The divorce. She was talking about my divorce, the emptiness it had left. Somehow, this thing, this hungry one, had sensed that wound and found it attractive. "I need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "To go home." Lily's smile widened, stretching beyond what a human face should allow. "But you already are home, James. We've made a place for you in the deep water, and we're already inside you, remember? Little pieces of us swimming in your blood." As if triggered by her words, I felt the foreign presence in my mind expand again, pushing against my thoughts. Images flashed behind my eyes. The black lake, pale forms drifting in its depths, a massive shape slumbering in the mud below. Waiting. "No," I gasped, pressing my palms against my temples as if I could physically push the intrusion out. "Get out of my head!" Lily stepped closer, now at the edge of my fire. "You can't fight it, James. Better to accept us, to join us. Otherwise—" "Otherwise what?" I demanded. "Otherwise, it hurts," she said simply. "The hungry one doesn't like being denied, and it's going to keep pulling you back here, no matter how far you run." As if to demonstrate, She reached one small hand toward the fire. Instead of stopping at the flames, her arm elongated impossibly, stretching across the distance between us like taffy. Her fingers, suddenly tipped with translucent claws, brushed my cheek in a mockery of a caress. I jerked away, falling backward. Lily laughed, the sound of water rushing over stones. "See you in your dreams, James," she said, and stepped back into the darkness, her form seeming to dissolve at the edges before disappearing completely. I spent the rest of the night feeding the fire, terrified of what might emerge from the darkness if the flames died. By dawn, I was hollow-eyed and trembling with exhaustion, but still alive. The morning light revealed I had stopped in a small clearing. No sign remained of Lily's visit, no footprints in the damp earth, no disturbance in the pine needles, only my certainty that it had been real. I had to find my way out of these woods. My wet clothes had dried somewhat overnight, and I still had my knife, fire kit, and a granola bar in my pocket. Not much for survival, but better than nothing. The biggest question was direction. Without my map or compass, I had no idea which way would lead to civilization. I decided to climb. If I could reach higher ground, I might spot a landmark, maybe even see the Forest Service road I'd been aiming for. I chose the tallest ridge visible through the trees and began hiking. The climb was arduous, made worse by hunger and exhaustion. Twice I had to stop and rest, my legs trembling with fatigue. But fear drove me onward. Fear of what waited in the lakes below, of the presence I still felt lurking at the edges of my consciousness. When I finally reached the ridgetop, the view nearly brought me to my knees with relief. In the distance, perhaps 5 miles north, I could see a straight line cutting through the forest, a road, and beyond that, the glint of what might be buildings. Civilization. I began walking north, staying on the ridge as long as possible to keep the road in sight. The forest here was different. Younger trees, more underbrush, signs of logging from decades past. More normal. I began to hope that I had passed beyond the territory of whatever haunted the hidden lakes. That hope died when I reached a stream that cut across my path. It was small, perhaps 10 feet across, shallow enough to see the rocky bottom. An easy crossing, but as I approached, the water changed, darkening, growing still despite the slope that should have kept it flowing. And from its depths came a familiar whisper, "James, we're still waiting." I backed away, heart pounding. The stream returned to normal, water burbling innocently over stones. A trick of my overtaxed mind, perhaps. But I couldn't take the chance. I followed the stream east, looking for a place to cross that didn't involve touching the water. After nearly a mile, I found it, a fallen tree forming a natural bridge. I crossed carefully, not looking down at the water below. By late afternoon, I reached the road, a gravel Forest Service route that showed signs of recent use. The tire tracks were the most beautiful sight I'd seen in days. I turned west, following the road downhill, reasoning that it must eventually lead to a main highway. I had walked perhaps 2 miles when I heard the most blessed sound imaginable, an engine. I turned to see a Forest Service truck approaching. I waved frantically, half afraid the vehicle would pass me by, but it slowed and stopped. The ranger who stepped out looked at me with concern that quickly shifted to recognition. "James Anderson," he asked. "We've had search parties out looking for you for 2 days. You missed your check-in." I nearly collapsed with relief. "I got lost," I said, the simplest explanation I could manage. "Lost my canoe and gear." He nodded, accepting this without question. "Let's get you back to Ely. You look like you could use a hot meal and a doctor." I climbed into the truck's cab, savoring the normality of seat cushions and dashboard instruments. As we drove away from the forest, I finally began to believe I might actually escape. "Weird area back there," the ranger commented as we bounced along the gravel road. "Folks have been reporting strange things for years. Voices, appearances, even had a few disappearances, though most turned up eventually." I said nothing, staring straight ahead at the road unwinding before us. "Local Ojibwe have stories about it," he continued. "Say there's something in the deep water that eats souls. calls to the lonely, the grief-stricken. He glanced at me. People going through tough times. My blood went cold. How do you know I'm going through a tough time? He smiled, and for just a moment, his eyes looked wrong. Too dark, too deep. Lucky guess, he said, his voice overlaid with a familiar chorus of whispers. You have that look about you. I lunged for the door handle, but it wouldn't move. Outside, the forest was changing, growing older, denser, the road narrowing. And ahead, glinting through the trees, I could see water. Black, still water reflecting the evening sky. No, I whispered. This isn't happening. Oh, but it is, James, said the thing wearing the ranger's face. I told you, no one really leaves. Parts of you will always remain. I closed my eyes, refusing to look at the approaching lake. This isn't real, I said desperately. You're in my head. Both can be true, it replied reasonably. Reality is flexible here. The truck stopped. When I opened my eyes, we were at the shore of the circular black lake. The ranger was gone. I sat alone in the cab, doors now hanging open, the engine silent. On the lake's far shore stood Lily, her white dress glowing in the twilight. Beside her were others, children of various ages, all with the same pale skin and two wide smiles. They waved in perfect unison. Last chance, James, Lily's voice carried across the water. Accept us willingly. It's easier that way. I stepped out of the truck, legs moving without my conscious control. The foreign presence in my mind had grown stronger, pushing my own thoughts aside like unwanted furniture. I could feel myself walking toward the water's edge, powerless to stop. My feet touched the cold lake. One more step and I would be fully in, ready to sink down to where the hungry one waited. Part of me wanted it, wanted an end to fear, to struggle, to the emptiness my divorce had left. But another part, the part that had survived 6 months of hell, that had pushed me to come here seeking healing rather than surrender, rallied in final defiance. No! I screamed, the word tearing from my throat with the same force I'd felt in the canoe. This is my mind, my life. I drove my consciousness against the invading presence like a battering ram, pushing back with every ounce of will I possessed. The pressure in my mind built to an unbearable crescendo, like two opposing tidal waves meeting. For a moment that stretched into eternity, we were locked in stalemate, neither gaining ground. Then something gave way, not in me, but in it. The foreign presence fractured, splintering into confused fragments that scattered through my consciousness like startled fish. The landscape around me shimmered, reality bending like heat waves over summer asphalt. The truck, the lake, Lily and her companions, all wavered, growing transparent, then solid again. Impossible. Lily's voice had lost its childish quality, revealing the ancient, hungry thing beneath. You cannot reject us. We are already part of you. No, I said, finding strength in the word. You tried to fill an empty space that isn't empty anymore. I filled it myself. And it was true. In fighting for my life, for myself, I had rekindled something I thought lost in the divorce. Not just the will to survive, but the understanding that I was worth fighting for. Lily screamed, the sound rippling across the water's surface in concentric rings. The other children joined her, their faces melting into alien configurations of rage and hunger. As one, they rushed toward me, ghostly feet skimming across the lake's surface. I stood my ground, focusing on the reality I knew was true. The Forest Service road, the search parties the ranger had mentioned, civilization waiting beyond these haunted woods. With each breath, the phantom lake receded a little more, the truck fading like mist in morning sun. Lily reached me first, her small hands now elongated into translucent claws that slashed at my face. I felt nothing, no impact, no pain. She passed through me like smoke, her form dispersing momentarily before reconstituting behind me. You cannot escape, she wailed, but her voice was fainter now, as if called from a great distance. "I already have," I told her, and turned my back on the lake, walking up the road with deliberate steps. Behind me, the chorus of voices rose in furious protest, promises of eternal loneliness mingling with threats of pain beyond imagining. I didn't look back, focusing only on the next step and the next, each one taking me farther from their influence. Gradually, the voices faded. The presence in my mind withdrew, leaving only faint echoes that pulsed like dying embers. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other as the forest around me normalized. Younger trees, evidence of human management, the occasional beer can or candy wrapper marking the proximity of civilization. I don't know how long I walked before the real Forest Service truck found me. Hours, maybe. The ranger who picked me up was solidly human, concerned about my physical state but asking few questions about how I'd gotten lost. I gave simple answers: equipment failure, bad weather, poor judgment, the normal explanations that people expected. They took me to a hospital in Ely, where doctors treated me for exposure, dehydration, and minor injuries. The ranger who'd found me promised to send a team to recover my abandoned canoe and gear, though I knew they wouldn't find anything at the hidden lake. It probably wasn't even there anymore, or rather, it was there, but not on any map they could read. 3 days later, I was released from the hospital and drove back to Minneapolis, back to my half-empty apartment and the pieces of my broken life. But something had changed. The divorce still hurt, the empty spaces still ached, but they were just empty spaces now, not wounds, not invitations for something hungry to fill them. Sometimes, though, I wake in the night to the sound of water lapping at the foot of my bed. In the bathroom mirror, I occasionally glimpse movement in the reflection that isn't mine. A child's face peering over my shoulder, pale and patient. And always there's a whisper at the back of my mind, faint but persistent. "We're still waiting, James. We have eternity, and you're already carrying us with you." I haven't gone camping since. I avoid lakes, rivers, even swimming pools. I take showers instead of baths. When it rains, I stay inside, windows closed, trying not to hear the voices in the falling water. But I know, sooner or later, I'll go back to the boundary waters. Not because I want to, but because I have to. Because part of me is already there, has always been there, echoing across dark water in a place that exists on no map. A place where the hungry thing still waits, dreaming its ancient dreams of those it has taken and those it will take again. My name is James Anderson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in northern Minnesota just last summer, and it isn't over.